What if the world around us wasn't as ordinary as it seems? Beneath the layers of science and reason lies a realm of puzzles that defy explanation, mysteries that leave even the brightest minds unsettled. From strange signals pulsing out of the void of space to ancient ruins in the deserts of Palestine that whisper of forgotten civilizations, humanity has always been confronted with questions that science cannot fully answer. We map the stars, split the atom, and unravel the code of life itself. Yet shadows remain. Why do some events repeat across history like echoes from an unseen hand? How do artifacts thousands of years old reveal knowledge far beyond their time? And what forces might be at work in the unexplored depths of our oceans, or in the silent corners of our own minds? Tonight, we step beyond the edge of certainty, into the unknown, into the mysteries that science can't explain. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. High above the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, the ruins of ancient temples stand as silent witnesses to a civilization that flourished more than 5,000 years ago. Sunlight falls on weathered stones etched with cuneiform, the world's earliest system of writing. These marks, carved with precision into clay tablets, carry the voices of priests, scribes, and kings. Among their many records, laws, hymns, and astronomical calculations, one recurring word captures the imagination of historians and seekers alike: Anunnaki. The name itself has drifted across time like an echo, layered with meanings that shift depending on who speaks it. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki appear as a group of powerful deities associated with heaven and earth. Their name is often translated as those of royal blood or those who came from heaven. Even this simple rendering opens doors to questions. Who were these beings, and why were they granted such a commanding place in the mythology of the earliest known civilization? To begin with what is known, the Sumerians, who rose in southern Mesopotamia around 4000 BC, created one of the most advanced societies of the ancient world. They developed irrigation, built the first cities, and left thousands of tablets filled with mythological accounts. In these myths, the Anunnaki were not a single god, but a collective, a divine assembly that determined humanity's fates. They resided in the heavens, but also presided over the underworld, suggesting a hierarchy that touched every realm of existence. Archaeologists and scholars largely view the Anunnaki as mythological constructs, personifications of natural forces, political order, and cosmic law. They were gods to whom rulers prayed, beings whose favor could bring prosperity or disaster. To the Sumerians, these deities explained the workings of the universe in ways human understanding alone could not. Yet, as centuries passed, the name Anunnaki began to blur across cultures. In Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian traditions, they retained their place as a divine assembly, though often in different roles. Some texts describe them as judges of the dead, others as celestial overseers. Their meaning shifted like sand in the desert winds, and with each retelling, their mystery deepened. Why does this ancient word continue to stir fascination today? Perhaps because the Anunnaki are more than a mythological footnote. They embody the enduring human urge to ask where we come from and who or what might have shaped us. In the 20th century, as archaeology revealed more of Mesopotamia's treasures, alternative interpretations emerged. Some researchers outside the academic mainstream proposed that the Anunnaki were not merely gods of myth, but perhaps memories of real beings, visitors, they argued, from beyond our world. The boldest theories suggested the name "those who came from heaven" be read literally, as evidence of extraterrestrial contact in antiquity. Supporters point to passages describing the Anunnaki descending from the sky, wielding knowledge far beyond early humanity's grasp. They ask, Could the Sumerians' sudden leap into urban civilization, mathematics, and astronomy have been guided by outside influences? Were the Anunnaki, in some sense, teachers from another realm? Mainstream scholars reject such claims, emphasizing that human ingenuity alone explains Mesopotamia's rise. They note that myths often describe gods descending from the heavens as symbolic expressions of power, not literal encounters. Still, the persistence of alternative theories speaks to something deeper, a longing for connection to a greater story, one that stretches beyond Earth and time. The structure of the word Anunnaki also puzzles linguists. Some translate Anu as heaven and Naki as earth, implying beings bridging both realms. Others emphasize their royal status, interpreting the term as princes of heaven and earth. Whichever translation is chosen, the result is consistent. The Anunnaki are intermediaries between realms, arbiters of destiny, shaping the boundary between human and divine. Their mythos raises another question. Why did the Sumerians imagine their gods as councils rather than solitary rulers? Unlike monotheistic faiths, these stories describe a collective, a divine bureaucracy. Was this a reflection of Sumerian political structures, with kings and councils, or an echo of something they believed they had witnessed, something too vast and complex for one god alone to embody? As night falls over the Mesopotamian plains, one can imagine the ancient Sumerians looking up at the same stars we see today, their minds filled with questions that remain ours. What lies beyond the sky? Who, if anyone, is watching? And how do we explain the mysteries that words like Anunnaki still carry thousands of years later? For now, the name remains both familiar and elusive. It is a bridge between myth and speculation, between what is written on clay tablets and what lingers in human imagination. Whether the Anunnaki were gods, symbols, or something else entirely, their story resists final explanation. Perhaps that is why they endure, because in their mystery, they remind us of our own. The truth of their origin and meaning may forever remain just out of reach. Yet every translation, every theory, every fragment of clay draws us deeper into the same question. Who were the Anunnaki really? And what secrets might still be waiting, buried beneath the sands of time? As we move deeper into the story of the Anunnaki, the trail leads us not only through ruins and artifacts, but into the very words left behind by the ancient scribes of Mesopotamia. To understand who the Anunnaki were believed to be, we must look closely at the texts that first inscribed their names into history. Imagine a dimly lit chamber in an archaeological museum. Inside glass cases lie fragile clay tablets, their surfaces covered in tiny wedge-shaped impressions. To the untrained eye, they appear as random scratches, but to those who can read cuneiform, they reveal hymns, myths, and epic stories. It is here, preserved in fired clay, that the earliest mentions of the Anunnaki emerge. One of the oldest and most significant texts is the Sumerian King List, a chronicle written around 2100 BC. This text lists rulers stretching back into the deep past, some reigning for impossibly long spans of time, thousands of years. Within its passages, the Anunnaki are described as gods who granted kingship to humanity. The implication is striking. Power and authority on earth were seen not as human inventions, but as gifts from these otherworldly beings. Was this simply a poetic way of sanctifying political power? Or did the Sumerians believe that their rulers truly received authority from divine forces beyond their understanding? Another vital source is the Epic of Gilgamesh, often called humanity's first great work of literature. In this tale, written on 12 clay tablets, the Anunnaki appear in a more somber role. They are depicted as judges of the underworld, decreeing the fates of the dead. Their presence looms over the hero Gilgamesh as he searches for immortality, reminding us that even kings and warriors are subject to forces beyond their control. Then there is the Atrahasis epic, an Akkadian text that tells a story of creation and flood, one that bears uncanny similarities to later biblical accounts. Here, the Anunnaki are again portrayed as powerful deities who play a role in shaping humanity. They are said to have ordered the creation of mankind to relieve themselves of hard labor, assigning humans the burden of toil. But as humanity multiplied, their noise disturbed the gods, leading the Anunnaki to unleash plagues, droughts, and eventually a devastating flood. Only Atrahasis, a chosen survivor, escaped destruction. Was this story purely myth, meant to explain natural disasters and social order? Or could it hint at deeper memories shared across cultures of a cataclysm long forgotten? The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, adds another layer. While it focuses primarily on the god Marduk and his triumph over chaos, the Anunnaki appear as celestial figures who establish order after the battle. They build temples, decree destinies, and organize the cosmos. The imagery suggests not just divine authority, but also a structured system, an assembly of beings who governed the universe much like a council might rule a kingdom. Why did so many Mesopotamian texts describe divine beings as organized collectives rather than solitary rulers? Was this simply a mirror of their own city-states, or an echo of something else? Archaeologists emphasize that these texts reflect the symbolic language of religion. The Anunnaki, in this view, were embodiments of natural forces and cosmic principles, not literal beings. Yet questions linger. The king lists improbable rains, the flood parallels in Atrahasis, and the repeated theme of the Anunnaki as arbiters of destiny all seem to gesture toward mysteries that resist easy explanation. It is here that fringe theories enter the conversation. Some researchers outside the academic mainstream suggest that the references to the Anunnaki in these texts are not mere mythology, but distorted accounts of encounters with advanced beings. They point to the phrase often translated as "those who came from heaven to earth," and argue, was this description metaphorical, or could it have been literal? Were the Sumerians recording, in their own symbolic language, memories of visitors from beyond? Most scholars reject these ideas, emphasizing the importance of cultural and literary context. They argue that the Anunnaki reflect the Sumerians' attempt to impose order on a chaotic world through stories of divine councils and decreed fates. Yet even among mainstream historians, the richness of these texts and their layered symbolism remain a source of fascination. The tablets themselves raise as many questions as they answer. Why did the Sumerians devote such care to recording these stories? What compelled them to preserve accounts of gods and floods, destinies and decrees, across centuries of shifting empires? And how did these narratives echo into later traditions, influencing myths and scriptures that shaped entire civilizations? Standing before those fragile clay tablets today, one cannot help but feel a sense of connection across the millennia. The same words that once guided priests and kings now whisper to us, their meanings blurred by time, yet still alive with mystery. Were the Anunnaki merely gods of myth, symbolic expressions of the earliest human imagination? Or do these texts preserve fragments of something we have yet to fully understand? The answer remains elusive. But as long as the tablets endure, and as long as humanity continues to ask questions, the mystery of the Anunnaki will not fade. Perhaps somewhere in these lines of cuneiform, still untranslated or misinterpreted, lies a clue waiting to be uncovered, one that could change the way we understand our own past. From the quiet corridors of museums to the windswept plains of ancient Mesopotamia, the figure of the Anunnaki emerges again and again, etched into tablets, woven into myths, and lingering in the questions of modern scholarship. We know they were named. We know they were feared and revered. But what exactly were the Anunnaki to those who first spoke their name? Were they gods, judges, or something far more complex? Step into the ruins of Nippur, once a sacred city at the heart of Sumerian civilization. Here, the great temple of Enlil, the chief god of the Sumerian pantheon, once stood in towering majesty. Beneath its crumbling remains, archaeologists have uncovered fragments of tablets that describe the Anunnaki not as individuals, but as a collective, a council of beings who presided over both heaven and the underworld. These texts speak of decrees made in assembly, destinies sealed with finality. The Anunnaki, it seems, were imagined not as solitary rulers, but as arbiters of fate itself. In some myths, they appear as gods of high authority, the children of Anu, the sky god. They sit in the heavens, bestowing kingship upon rulers, sanctioning order in a world always on the brink of chaos. In other traditions, particularly those describing the afterlife, the Anunnaki are invoked as judges of the dead. They determine who may find rest and who must wander in shadows. Their role is not merciful, but absolute, final guardians of the boundary between life and death. This dual identity raises intriguing questions. How could the same beings be described both as exalted deities of the heavens and stern judges of the underworld? Did the Sumerians see the Anunnaki as divine in the way later civilizations understood gods? Or were they something different? Intermediaries, enforcers, perhaps even administrators of a cosmic order too vast for mortals to grasp. The language itself offers hints. The term Anunnaki is often translated as offspring of Anu, or princes of heaven and earth. Both interpretations suggest hierarchy, lineage, and governance. They were not creators of the world, nor singular rulers. Instead, they were a kind of divine bureaucracy, powerful, yes, but operating within an order that even they did not fully command. To the Sumerians, the universe was structured like their own cities and kingdoms, with assemblies, councils, and decrees. The Anunnaki fit neatly into that vision, reflecting the balance between divine authority and collective judgment. Yet beyond the orderly lines of translation, the myths themselves hint at something stranger. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Anunnaki stand as judges in the underworld, immutable and cold. In the Atrahasis epic, they unleash floods and plagues upon humanity, their decisions shaping the very survival of mankind. Such portrayals suggest beings of immense power, both revered and feared, their motives often inscrutable. For mainstream historians, these stories are allegories, mythological ways of making sense of natural disasters, political shifts, and the inevitability of death. The Anunnaki were symbols, not literal entities, representing the forces that governed human existence. Yet, the consistency of their portrayal across centuries invites further curiosity. Why did the Mesopotamians imagine their deities as assemblies rather than singular rulers? Why this persistent image of the Anunnaki as judges and decision-makers? It is here that speculative interpretations enter the conversation. Some have suggested that the Anunnaki were remembered less as gods in the spiritual sense, and more as powerful beings who once walked among humans. If their name means those who came from heaven to earth, could the role of judges and rulers reflect direct encounters, memories of beings whose authority was unquestionable? Were the myths attempts to preserve a distant reality encoded in symbols and stories? Others propose a more psychological reading, that the Anunnaki represent humanity's own recognition of unseen laws, forces that judge and determine without mercy. Death, destiny, the cycles of nature, all personified in a council of beings whose authority was beyond question. In this sense, the Anunnaki were both gods and judges, because they embodied the deepest truths of existence. The tablets leave us with fragments rather than answers. A hymn may describe the Anunnaki enthroned in splendor, granting kingship to mortals. Another text may show them seated in the underworld, determining the fate of souls. Still another speaks of their role in ordering the cosmos after battles among the gods. Each version adds depth, but also contradiction. Were they benevolent or harsh, creators or destroyers, rulers of life or guardians of death? Standing in the shadow of those ancient temples, one is reminded of how much remains unknown. The Anunnaki are too complex to be easily defined, too multifaceted to fit neatly into categories. Perhaps they were all of these things at once: gods, judges, and something else entirely. Perhaps they were the embodiment of humanity's oldest recognition that power, authority, and judgment come from forces beyond our control, whether divine, natural, or something we have yet to comprehend. And so the question lingers. When the Sumerians carved the name of the Anunnaki into clay, were they speaking of distant gods, symbolic forces, or memories of beings that walked the earth long ago? The tablets remain silent, their wedge-shaped marks whispering only fragments. What they do not say is as haunting as what they reveal. The mystery endures, leaving us to wonder, who were the Anunnaki really? And why did the earliest civilizations place them at the heart of both heaven and the underworld? Among the crumbling remains of Mesopotamian ziggurats, where incense once drifted in devotion, the memory of two powerful figures lingers: Enki and Enlil. Their names echo across the clay tablets, intertwined with the destinies of gods and humans alike. Brothers, rivals, and at times uneasy allies, their relationship is one of the most enduring themes in Sumerian and Akkadian mythology. But why do the myths so often portray them in conflict? Enlil, whose temple at Nippur dominated the sacred landscape, was regarded as supreme authority of the pantheon. He was the god of wind, air, and storm, an austere figure associated with order, kingship, and the enforcement of divine decrees. His presence was formidable, his word final. Enki, by contrast, was the god of water, wisdom, and creation. His sanctuary stood at Eridu, believed by the Sumerians to be the first settlement. Where Enlil ruled with stern command, Enki acted with cunning and compassion. He was the trickster, the teacher, the one who brought secret knowledge to humanity. When their stories intersect, a pattern emerges. Enlil as the enforcer of divine law, Enki as the one who bends or breaks it in favor of humankind. In the Atrahasis epic, when Enlil resolves to silence humanity's noise by sending plagues, famine, and eventually a flood, it is Enki who warns Atrahasis, instructing him to build a vessel and preserve life. Enlil represents judgment, Enki, intervention. Why then does Mesopotamian myth insist on setting them against one another? Some historians suggest that these tensions reflect political realities. Nippur and Eridu were rival religious centers, each vying for influence in early Mesopotamia. The rivalry between Enlil and Enki may have been less about divine beings than human politics encoded in myth. To the people of Nippur, Enlil was supreme. To Eridu, Enki's wisdom guided. Could these stories of conflict be echoes of competition among priesthoods and city-states? Others see a symbolic layer. Enlil embodies authority, discipline, and inevitable divine judgment. Enki represents flexibility, creativity, and mercy. Their rivalry could reflect a deeper duality, the tension between law and compassion, order and freedom, structure and innovation. Was this mythic drama a way for Sumerians to wrestle with life's contradictions? And yet, the stories grant Enki a peculiar advantage. Though Enlil holds higher rank, it is Enki who finds ways around his decrees, rescues humanity from extinction, and slips knowledge into mortal hands. If Enlil is power, Enki is ingenuity. Could the Sumerians have seen in this rivalry the eternal truth that wisdom sometimes triumphs over strength, cleverness over command? Speculative theories take the narrative further. Some suggest that the myths encode not just allegories, but distant memories of real beings, figures whose disagreements shaped the destiny of early humanity. In this view, Enlil becomes the strict overseer, enforcing obedience, while Enki is the rebel, defying authority for his creation's sake. Supporters of this interpretation point to parallels with later traditions: gods and angels at odds, rebellions in heaven, conflicts between lawgivers and tricksters. Is it coincidence that so many ancient cultures preserve stories of rival powers shaping humanity's fate? The language of the myths leaves room for questions. Enlil's decrees are binding and irreversible, yet Enki repeatedly subverts them, offering secrets and guidance that alter events. Were these dramatic flourishes in storytelling, or do they hint at deeper memories, accounts of figures whose rivalry was not entirely metaphorical? Archaeological discoveries add texture, but not clarity. Tablets from Nippur emphasize Enlil's supremacy, his authority over heaven and earth. Those from Eridu celebrate Enki's wisdom, his role as giver of arts, magic, and civilization. Each city preserved the story from its vantage point, shaping divine rivalry into a reflection of human loyalties. Did Sumerians see this as conflict among gods, or as a balance of cosmic forces necessary to sustain order? Perhaps the most haunting aspect is the outcome. Humanity survives not because of Enlil's judgment, but Enki's defiance. If Enlil represents inevitable destruction, Enki stands for the persistence of life and knowledge. This duality resonates even now, reminding us of the fragile balance between authority and compassion, rules that bind and wisdom that liberates. And yet, the story resists simple interpretation. Was the rivalry merely a projection of political and cultural tensions? A symbolic drama expressing the contradictions of law and mercy? Or does it point to something older and more enigmatic, memories of beings whose conflicts shaped the earliest civilizations? The clay tablets remain silent beyond their lines of cuneiform, leaving only fragments to piece together. Yet in those fragments lies a mystery as compelling as any. Why did the Sumerians see conflict not just among humans, but among the very beings they believed governed the cosmos? The rivalry of Enki and Enlil remains a story of paradox. Brothers in myth, divided by purpose, their struggle forever suspended between history, symbolism, and perhaps something more. And so the question lingers: what truth lies hidden behind their conflict, and how much of it have we yet to uncover? From the hushed halls of ancient libraries to the windswept ruins of Mesopotamian temples, one question lingers like a shadow over the clay tablets of Sumer. Did the Anunnaki create humans as servants? It is a claim repeated in myths, whispered across interpretations, and debated fiercely by scholars and seekers alike. In the dim light of an archaeological storeroom, a tablet from the 17th century BC lies under protective glass. Its surface is covered in cuneiform, meticulous impressions that record the Atrahasis epic, one of the most important Mesopotamian stories about the origins of humankind. In its lines, the Anunnaki are portrayed not as distant figures, but as participants in a drama of labor and rebellion. According to this tale, the lesser gods, burdened with endless toil, digging canals, maintaining rivers, shaping the land, grew weary of their endless work. They rose in protest against the higher gods, demanding relief. The solution was both simple and profound. the creation of humankind. The epic describes how clay was mixed with the blood of a slain god to fashion the first humans, who were then tasked with the labors once imposed on the divine. From this moment onward, humanity's role was clear: workers for the gods, bound to serve their needs. But how should we understand this story? Was it merely a mythological explanation for why people must labor in the fields, enduring backbreaking work under the Mesopotamian sun? Or was it something more, a reflection of how the Sumerians saw their place in the cosmos as subordinates in a hierarchy stretching from earth to heaven? The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, tells a similar tale. After the cosmic battle between Marduk and Tiamat, the victorious gods decide to fashion humans from clay mixed with divine essence. Again, the reason is practical. Humankind is created to maintain temples, provide offerings, and sustain the gods through ritual and devotion. The theme repeats: humans exist to serve. To modern readers, this idea is unsettling. We are accustomed to creation stories that describe humanity as central, chosen, or sacred. But in Mesopotamia, the myths often placed people at the bottom of the hierarchy, necessary but subordinate, tasked with ensuring the divine order continued without disruption. Was this a reflection of their society, where kings and priests ruled over vast numbers of laborers? Or did the Sumerians believe they were recording something revealed to them, an account of humanity's true origins? Mainstream scholars interpret these texts as symbolic. The gods in the Atrahasis epic and Enuma Elish personify natural forces, political structures, and cosmic laws. Humanity's creation as servants mirrors the reality of life in the earliest city-states, where most people labored in fields and canals to support the ruling elite. The myths, in this reading, were not literal history, but allegories of social order. And yet, certain details raise questions. Why did these texts describe creation as the result of rebellion among divine beings? Why the imagery of blood and clay, a fusion of mortal and divine? And why did later cultures echo these themes, from stories of gods fashioning man from earth to accounts of floods that nearly wiped humanity away? Could the consistency of these narratives point to a shared memory, something older than myth? Speculative theories step into this gap. Some suggest that the Anunnaki were not imagined beings at all, but powerful figures who imposed their will on early humanity. In this view, the stories of humans created as workers are not metaphors, but accounts of intervention, perhaps even genetic manipulation by advanced beings. The detail of mixing divine essence with clay has been interpreted by fringe thinkers as symbolic of blending DNA with earthly material. Could it be that the Sumerians preserved, in myth, memories of something extraordinary, an encounter with beings who shaped humanity not as equals, but as servants? Most historians caution against such readings, pointing out that mythology often employs vivid imagery to explain social and natural realities. Still, the persistence of these themes is difficult to ignore. Across Mesopotamian texts, humanity is depicted not as master of the world, but as subordinate, created with a purpose, bound by duty. It is a vision of existence strikingly different from many later traditions, and one that continues to fuel debate. Standing before the tablets today, one is left with a mixture of awe and unease. The stories are clear in their intent. Humanity was created to bear burdens once carried by the gods, but the deeper meaning remains elusive. Were these simply myths to justify labor and ritual in ancient cities? Or do they preserve fragments of a story we no longer fully understand? One in which the role of humanity was decided long before we could speak our own name? The clay tablets remain silent, their wedge-shaped signs preserving both history and mystery. And so the question endures, were the Anunnaki truly seen as creators of humanity, shaping us as servants to their will? Or do these myths conceal a truth far more complex, one still hidden beneath the sands of Mesopotamia, waiting to be uncovered? Beneath the shifting sands of Mesopotamia, where fragments of clay tablets emerge from the earth like whispers of forgotten memory, a question lingers. Did the Anunnaki come to Earth not merely as gods, but as miners, seeking something far more tangible than worship? Gold? The story begins not with a mine or a gleaming nugget, but with tablets etched in cuneiform, the world's first written script. These records, pressed into wet clay more than 4,000 years ago, describe offerings, trade, kingship, and the movements of celestial bodies. They reveal that the Sumerians valued gold highly, using it in jewelry, ritual objects, and as a symbol of divine radiance. The gods themselves were often described in terms that glittered, robes shining like the sun, thrones overlaid with precious metals. To the Sumerians, gold was not currency. It was an emblem of the eternal, untarnished, and divine. Yet nowhere, in any surviving tablet, does the text plainly declare that the Anunnaki came to Earth to mine gold. The theory of extraterrestrial miners arises much later, not from the tablets themselves, but from modern interpretations. In the 20th century, author Zecharia Sitchin proposed that the Anunnaki were visitors from another world, advanced beings who came to Earth tens of thousands of years ago. According to his reading, humanity was created as a labor force to extract gold, a resource needed to repair the atmosphere of their distant planet Nibiru. Mainstream scholars reject this view, noting that Sitchin's translations diverge dramatically from standard Sumerology. In the original texts, Anunnaki refers broadly to a group of deities linked to the heavens and the underworld. Their roles were complex: judges, mediators, bringers of fate, but the surviving literature does not describe them wielding pickaxes or smelting ore. Human labor, particularly in agriculture and irrigation, is clearly emphasized in the texts, while divine labor remains metaphorical. And yet, the mystery persists. Why has the gold mining theory captured imagination? Perhaps it is because gaps in Mesopotamian records leave room for speculation. Only a fraction of Sumerian texts survive, many fragmented or untranslated. Could references to labor, creation, and divine need have been reinterpreted through a modern lens, one shaped by concerns of resources, technology, and space? Consider the Atrahasis epic. It describes lesser gods rebelling against hard labor, leading to the creation of humankind. Mainstream interpretation sees this as symbolic of agricultural or ritual tasks. Yet others ask, what if the work of the gods was more industrial, more physical? What if their labor was extraction rather than irrigation? Gold itself deepens the intrigue. Unlike iron or bronze, gold is not particularly useful for tools or weapons. Its enduring qualities, resistance to corrosion, and remarkable conductivity are prized in modern technology. Could it be that the Anunnaki, if more than myth, sought gold for purposes unknown to the Sumerians? Across cultures, myths link gods with shining metals and celestial light. Might this imagery preserve a memory of something more than symbolic ornamentation? Caution is essential. Archaeologists remind us that gold's role in ancient Mesopotamia was tied to immortality and divine power, not interstellar engineering. Temples in Ur and Uruk glittered not because builders imagined alien atmospheres, but because gold mirrored the eternal nature of the gods. Still, could these symbols encode fragments of encounters or ideas now beyond our reach? Ancient mines elsewhere add another layer. In southern Africa, sites in modern South Africa and Zimbabwe date back thousands of years. Mainstream archaeology attributes these to early human activity, Speculative theories link them to Anunnaki narratives, suggesting the gods' quest for gold may not have been confined to Mesopotamia. Could myths from one region reflect physical evidence in another? Or do we simply weave stories from scattered evidence, filling gaps with imagination? Standing before the surviving tablets, one is struck by both their clarity and their silence. They speak eloquently of gods, kings, and rituals, but not of spacecraft, planets, or mining expeditions. The gold mining theory is not a translation, but a reinterpretation, reading myths through modern lenses. Yet the allure persists. Myths often carry layers, some obvious, others hidden, waiting to be revealed. Thus we face a paradox. The tablets tell of gods who shaped humanity, who demanded service, and who treasured gold. Modern theorists extend the story, suggesting these gods were visitors with needs we can scarcely imagine. Which version is closer to truth? Were the Anunnaki reflections of human hopes and fears, or did ancient scribes preserve traces of something more? Encounters whose purposes remain unknown. As desert winds sweep across the ruins of Ur, the question endures. Did the Anunnaki truly mine gold on Earth, creating humanity to serve in this pursuit? Or is this idea itself a modern myth, born from fascination with the heavens and the search for meaning in the silence of the past? Across the windswept plains of Mesopotamia, where crumbling ziggurats rise like silent sentinels of another age, the skies overhead seem to echo with ancient questions. The Sumerians, some of the earliest astronomers in human history, looked upward with awe and precision, charting the paths of planets, stars, and constellations. Among their observations were records of Venus, Jupiter, and Mars, celestial bodies tracked carefully across the heavens. But modern speculation has introduced a far more enigmatic presence into this cosmic map, a mysterious 12th planet, often called Nibiru, and its supposed connection to the Anunnaki. The idea traces back to the interpretations of Zecharia Sitchin, who in the late 20th century argued that the Sumerian texts contained references not only to the planets we know, but also to one hidden, distant world. According to his readings, the term Nibiru meant the crossing, or point of transition, and described a celestial body that moved on an elongated orbit, returning to the inner solar system only once every 3,600 years. In this framework, Nibiru was not just another star or planet. It was the very home of the Anunnaki, the gods who, he claimed, visited Earth to mine gold and shape humanity. Yet, when we turn to the clay tablets themselves, the story grows less certain. The word Nibiru appears in various contexts, especially in Babylonian and Akkadian astronomical texts. Often it refers not to a hidden planet, but to a crossing point, such as the place where the paths of stars and planets intersect. In some texts, Nibiru seems to be associated with Jupiter, in others with Mercury, at times even with the North Star. Mainstream Assyriologists emphasize that these references describe observable points of alignment in the sky, not an undiscovered world lurking at the edge of our solar system. Still, one cannot help but wonder, why has the idea of Nibiru endured? Perhaps because the texts themselves are fragmented and layered with symbolism. Could it be that what ancient scribes described in poetic or metaphorical language contained memories of something far more literal, something they observed but did not fully understand? Could Nibiru, as Sitchin argued, represent more than a crossing star, instead hinting at a celestial wanderer with ties to Earth's earliest myths? The mystery deepens when we consider the nature of Sumerian astronomy. These were not casual sky watchers. They mapped planetary movements with remarkable accuracy, creating star charts and calendars that influenced generations of civilizations. If they understood so much, is it possible they also preserved knowledge of something we have forgotten? Could the Anunnaki themselves have been linked in their minds with this elusive Nibiru, a place of origin, a cosmic point of passage, or perhaps both? Skeptics point out that no surviving text describes Nibiru explicitly as the dwelling place of gods, nor do the tablets speak of a long elliptical orbit or a hidden planet beyond Neptune. Those details come not from the cuneiform inscriptions, but from modern reinterpretations layered onto them. Yet the idea refuses to fade. Each time new astronomical discoveries emerge, from dwarf planets like Eris and Sedna, to hypotheses about a possible Planet 9 lurking unseen in the far reaches of our solar system, the echoes of Nibiru return. Could it be that ancient myths preserve a distant memory of celestial bodies we are only now beginning to confirm? There are other curiosities too. Ancient Mesopotamian texts often speak of the gods descending from the heavens, or rising from the depths. Were these simply poetic metaphors for divine power, or could they be rooted in memories of celestial phenomena, unusual stars, comets, or wandering planets that seemed to appear and vanish from human sight? If so, might Nibiru have been less a place and more an idea, a symbol of the crossing between realms, between gods and men, between the known and the unknown? Even today, the word stirs unease. Predictions of Nibiru's catastrophic return have circulated in modern times, often tied to doomsday scenarios. None of these predictions have come to pass. But behind the sensationalism lies a quieter, deeper mystery. Why do we continue to connect the Anunnaki, ancient deities of Mesopotamia, with a wandering planet we have yet to confirm? Is this simply a projection of our own cosmic anxieties, or is there an ancient thread of knowledge waiting to be unraveled? As twilight falls over the ruins of Ur and the first stars pierce the desert sky, it is easy to imagine how the Sumerians once looked upward, their gaze fixed on the endless dome above. Among those stars, they found patterns, rhythms, and meaning. They wrote of gods who crossed between realms, who brought fate and order, who arrived from places beyond. Was Nibiru, then, a planet, a star, or something more elusive, a symbol of transition, of the eternal crossing between the human and the divine? And so, the question remains: what truly is the link between the Anunnaki and Nibiru? Is it a misreading of ancient texts, a modern myth built upon fragments of clay? Or does it conceal a memory of celestial knowledge, knowledge still hidden in the silence of broken tablets and the vastness of the night sky? As we move from the mysteries of the heavens back to the stories of the earth, we encounter another theme that has haunted human memory for millennia: the Great Flood. Across the shattered tablets of Mesopotamia, the flood appears not as a singular event, but as a recurring symbol, a catastrophe that reshaped both the world and humanity's relationship with the divine. And at the center of these narratives, once again, stand the Anunnaki. Imagine standing among the ruins of ancient Shuruppak, one of the oldest Sumerian cities, its broken walls and buried foundations layered with the sediments of ages. Archaeologists have uncovered signs of flooding here, thick bands of river clay resting between levels of habitation. While these layers alone do not prove a single cataclysmic deluge, they do suggest periods of devastation, moments when water overwhelmed the land. It is here, in these very ruins, that myths of the flood take root. The Sumerian king list, one of the earliest chronicles of rulers, states plainly, "Then the flood swept over. Entire dynasties are marked as ending before the waters came, as if time itself was reset in its wake." In the Atrahasis epic, the flood emerges as the response of the gods, particularly Enlil, who grew weary of humanity's noise and numbers. The Anunnaki, bound by their roles as divine judges and decision-makers, are depicted as both instigators of the deluge and, in some accounts, mourners of its destruction. But here, the narratives diverge in fascinating ways. Enlil seeks silence, perhaps control, while Enki, often portrayed as a benefactor of humankind, whispers warnings to Atrahasis, guiding him to build a vessel and preserve life. This interplay between divine wrath and divine mercy highlights the ambiguous nature of the Anunnaki. Were they benevolent creators, or distant overseers who could erase humanity at will? The story continues in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim recounts his survival of the flood to the king of Uruk. He describes the terror of the storm, the cries of the gods themselves as they watched the waters rise. The Anunnaki raised torches, lighting the land with their glare. One fragment recalls, a haunting image that blurs the line between myth and memory. Were these torches metaphors for lightning, or echoes of something more unusual, phenomena witnessed and remembered in the only language available to ancient scribes? Mainstream scholars interpret these flood stories as reflections of real events. Regional floods of the Tigris and Euphrates, magnified into myth through oral tradition. In this view, the Anunnaki embody natural forces, capricious, destructive, yet also life-giving. But others ask whether these myths preserve more than symbolism. Could the flood narratives represent not just natural disaster, but intervention? Did the Anunnaki, as some suggest, deliberately unleash catastrophe to reshape humanity's destiny? The parallels across cultures add to the mystery. From the story of Noah in the Hebrew Bible to flood myths in India, Greece, and the Americas, the theme recurs with striking consistency. Why would so many civilizations, separated by distance and time, preserve memories of a deluge? Were these simply archetypal tales born of human fear of water's power, or do they hint at a shared origin, an actual event, witnessed and retold in countless forms? And if so, why are the Anunnaki placed so firmly at the center of the Mesopotamian version? Some speculative theories suggest that the Anunnaki, if interpreted as more than myth, might have had reasons for such an act. Was the flood a method of control, a way to eliminate an early humanity that had grown unruly or defiant? Others propose it could reflect cosmic cycles, perhaps even tied to celestial movements like those associated with Nibiru. Though such ideas remain outside mainstream scholarship, they remind us how deeply the flood myth stirs the imagination, linking earthly disaster with cosmic design. Standing before the remnants of clay tablets in museums today, one can trace the wedge-shaped impressions of the scribes who first recorded these tales. Their words capture more than destruction. They reveal tension among the gods themselves, debates, warnings, regrets. The Anunnaki were not united in purpose. Some demanded silence through annihilation, others sought preservation. In these divisions, we glimpse not only the complexity of myth, but also the enduring question of what the gods, or those remembered as gods, truly were. And so, the flood remains both history and mystery. Sediment layers point to real inundations. Myths preserve stories of survival and divine wrath. But why the Anunnaki? Why would these figures, so often tied to creation, judgment, and cosmic order, also stand at the heart of destruction? Were they symbols of nature's unpredictability, reflections of human struggle with life along great rivers? Or were they something else, beings whose choices left humanity forever marked by memory of the waters? As the rivers still flow through the lands of ancient Sumer, their floods less devastating now but still feared, the question endures. Why are the Anunnaki so central in these flood myths? Is it coincidence, symbolism, or testimony of an encounter our ancestors could only preserve in story? What truths lie buried beneath the clay, waiting for discovery, or perhaps destined to remain hidden in the silence of the past. When the waters of this great flood receded, the Sumerians believed that life began again under the guidance of the gods. But with this new beginning came something else, a mystery inscribed into clay, preserved on a document known as the Sumerian King List. At first glance, it appears to be a simple record of rulers, their cities, and the length of their reigns. Yet, hidden within its lines lies one of the most puzzling enigmas of Mesopotamian history: the extraordinary lifespans attributed to its earliest kings, lifespans that seem tied directly to the presence of the Anunnaki. The king list begins with the phrase, "After the kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu." The wording is striking. Kingship, according to the text, did not arise from human choice or conquest, but was something bestowed by divine powers, the Anunnaki themselves. And the rulers who received this gift did not reign for mere decades. Ululim of Eridu, for instance, is said to have ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, Alalgar, ruled for 36,000. In total, 8 antediluvian kings reigned for an astonishing 241,200 years before the flood swept over. Why would the scribes record such impossible spans of time? Were these figures symbolic, meant to reflect greatness, or did they preserve something older, something less easily explained? Mainstream historians suggest that the enormous numbers may have served a symbolic purpose. They could mark cycles of time, perhaps lunar or solar calculations magnified into myth. Some scholars propose that the figures reflect a tradition of exaggeration, ways to emphasize the legendary nature of early rulers, setting them apart from mortal men. After the flood, the king list records much shorter reigns, ones that slowly decrease until they resemble historical reality. This transition seems deliberate, as though the world before and after the deluge were fundamentally different. But others have asked, why tie these lifespans so closely to the Anunnaki? If kingship descended from heaven, was the implication that the earliest rulers were not entirely human? Could these long reigns reflect beings of another kind, figures remembered as kings but perhaps closer to gods? The king list is not the only text to hint at unusual longevity. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes its hero as 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, a ruler blessed with strength and endurance far beyond that of ordinary men. Gilgamesh's quest for immortality mirrors humanity's own struggle to reconcile the fleeting nature of life with memories of gods and kings who seemed to endure for ages. Was this mythology, or a reflection of real traditions that once connected rulers directly to the Anunnaki? Archaeology provides tantalizing, if ambiguous, evidence. The earliest cities of Mesopotamia, Eridu, Uruk, and Kish, rose suddenly from the plains, with complex administration, monumental architecture, and sophisticated religious systems already in place. To the Sumerians, this sudden rise was no accident. It was the result of divine kingship descending from heaven, a direct gift of the gods. Could their extraordinary claims about lifespan be part of the same memory, that the first rulers were of a different order, endowed with something that set them apart? Modern speculative theories, particularly those influenced by interpretations of Zecharia Sitchin, push this further. If the Anunnaki were advanced beings who shaped humanity, then perhaps these long lifespans reflected genuine differences, extended longevity tied to biology, technology, or even cosmic origin. Were these early kings not humans at all, but Anunnaki themselves, remembered in later tradition as rulers of men? The fact that their reigns abruptly ended with the flood only adds to the mystery, and yet the texts themselves remain open to interpretation. Did the Sumerians truly believe their kings lived for tens of thousands of years? Or were these numbers a form of sacred numerology, encoding cycles of time now lost to us? Could they represent astronomical observations, alignments of planets, or great cycles of the heavens, translated into human terms? Or do they conceal memories of something else entirely, encounters that blurred the line between myth and history? What is clear is that the Anunnaki stood at the heart of this system. Kingship was never human in origin. It was divine, granted by gods who could raise one city to power and cast another down. The longevity of early rulers was not simply personal. It was tied to the presence of the Anunnaki, as if their reigns reflected the span of divine influence on Earth. Even today, reading the king list evokes unease. The names are unfamiliar, the numbers almost unimaginable, yet the narrative is insistent. These were not ordinary men, and their reigns were not ordinary spans. Something extraordinary marked the earliest ages of humanity, something that later generations tried to preserve in the only language they had: myth, number, and story. So the question endures: were the immense lifespans of Mesopotamian kings mere symbols, a way to mark the distance between human and divine? Or do they conceal fragments of a deeper truth, that in the shadow of the Anunnaki, time itself was different? As the clay tablets whisper across thousands of years, we are left to wonder what reality lies hidden behind the numbers and what memories still wait, half buried, in the sands of Sumer. In a quiet, climate-controlled room, far from the deserts where they were first unearthed, thousands of clay tablets sit behind glass and archival shelves. Their surfaces are etched with cuneiform, small wedge-shaped impressions pressed into wet clay more than 4,000 years ago. To the untrained eye, they appear as abstract marks, but to scholars, they are the fragile voices of ancient Mesopotamia. Among these tablets are texts that speak of the Anunnaki, beings described as gods, judges, and overseers of human destiny. Yet here lies the mystery. Depending on which translation one reads, the meaning of these words shifts, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. Why do translations of the same tablets differ so widely among scholars? And what do these differences reveal about who or what the Anunnaki were? The answer begins with the script itself. Cuneiform is one of the earliest writing systems, invented in Sumer around 3100 BC. Unlike modern alphabets, it was not straightforward. A single sign could represent a sound, a word, or an entire concept depending on context. Over centuries, the script evolved, spreading from Sumer to Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria, accumulating layers of meaning. By the time a scribe pressed a stylus into clay, their signs carried echoes of multiple traditions. For the modern translator, every line is a puzzle. Mainstream Assyriologists emphasize that these complexities naturally lead to differences. One scholar might read a sign as a literal word, God, king, or heaven, while another interprets it symbolically or as part of a compound. Small choices ripple outward, altering the meaning of entire passages. A phrase describing the Anunnaki as those of princely seed might also be rendered as offspring of the noble line, or gods of royal descent. Each version carries nuance, subtly reshaping the story. Beyond these natural difficulties, another layer of mystery emerges. Some translations present the Anunnaki as divine figures who decree fates and dwell in the underworld. Others emphasize their role as sky gods, associated with stars and cosmic order. Still others, drawing on fringe interpretations, depict them as beings who came from beyond, visitors interacting with humanity in ways that resemble modern accounts of advanced technology or extraterrestrial contact. How could the same ancient signs yield such different portraits? Part of the answer lies in the biases and goals of translators. In the 19th century, when cuneiform was first deciphered, scholars were often guided by biblical concerns, hoping to find confirmation of familiar stories, creation, the flood, the Tower of Babel, within Mesopotamian texts. Later in the 20th century, scholars emphasized historical and cultural contexts, reading the tablets as reflections of human society rather than divine intervention. By the late 20th century, writers like Zecharia Sitchin proposed radically different translations, suggesting the Anunnaki were not gods, but flesh and blood beings from another world. His interpretations were controversial, criticized by academics, yet they resonated with a public hungry for alternative narratives. Which raises a haunting question. Are our readings uncovering ancient truths, or merely reflecting the assumptions we bring to them? When one scholar sees gods and another sees visitors from the stars, are they interpreting the past or projecting onto it? The physical condition of the tablets deepens the uncertainty. Many are broken, edges crumbled by time, leaving gaps filled only with educated guesses. A single missing sign can change the tone, transforming a command into a supplication or a description of divine beings into a record of earthly kings. Even intact tablets resist clarity. Sumerian, the earliest written language, is a linguistic isolate, unrelated to any known tongue. Akkadian, which followed, is better understood but still ambiguous. Translation becomes interpretation, subjectivity woven into every line. Consider the flood myth inscribed on a tablet from Nineveh. Some translations present the Anunnaki as judges who bring the deluge to cleanse the earth. Others describe them as weeping, mourning humanity's destruction. The same signs, yet two visions of divine intention. Were the Anunnaki destroyers or protectors? This tension between certainty and ambiguity is both exhilarating and unsettling. We hold the oldest written records of civilization, yet we cannot be entirely sure what they say. What if the essence of the Anunnaki's role, whether gods, kings, or something else entirely, remains just beyond our grasp, hidden in the shadows of translation? Some argue that these differences are not flaws but windows, evidence that ancient texts were layered with meaning, designed to be read differently by priests, scribes, and rulers. Could the ambiguity have been intentional? A way to preserve mysteries never meant to be fully revealed? As we listen to the quiet echoes of these clay fragments, one thing is clear. The Anunnaki were central to Mesopotamian imagination, yet their true nature remains obscured, filtered through the choices of translators. Are we uncovering the voice of the ancients, or constructing a story of our own? The tablets remain silent, waiting for us to decide which version of their story we are willing to believe. In the hushed halls of modern museums, shelves upon shelves of clay tablets sit catalogued, numbered, and carefully preserved. Yet for every tablet we see today, there are countless more that have been lost. Some crumbled to dust with the collapse of mud brick libraries. Others were shattered by fire, conquest, or the slow erosion of time. And still more remain buried beneath layers of earth, undiscovered. What secrets might those missing tablets hold? Could they change everything we think we know about the Anunnaki? The most famous discovery of Mesopotamian literature came in the mid-19th century, when explorers digging in the ruins of Nineveh uncovered the library of Ashurbanipal. Within its walls lay tens of thousands of clay tablets, a treasure trove of myth, history, law, and ritual. It was from these fragments that the Epic of Gilgamesh was first reconstructed, and with it, the flood story that so closely mirrors later biblical accounts. Yet even this great library is incomplete. Whole sections of epics are missing. Tablets that once described the deeds of gods and kings are reduced to broken shards. When scholars attempt to reconstruct the narratives of the Anunnaki, they often find themselves staring at gaps, lines that trail off mid-sentence, scenes that begin but never resolve. One flood tablet, for instance, tells us of the gods debating humanity's fate. Yet just as the dialogue grows tense, the clay breaks off. What might the missing lines have revealed? Did they contain a motive, a hidden plan, or perhaps an insight into the Anunnaki's true role? Some mainstream historians caution that we must accept these losses as part of the archaeological record. Clay, though durable, is fragile. Invasions, looting, and even well-meaning excavations have destroyed untold amounts of material, but others suggest that the gaps themselves spark questions. What if some tablets were intentionally withheld, concealed, or even destroyed because their contents were too controversial, too unsettling, or too revealing? Speculation grows sharper when we remember how much has been discovered almost by chance. A farmer's plow, a collapsed wall, or a shifting riverbed has unearthed texts that rewrote history. If a single broken tablet can transform our understanding of Mesopotamian cosmology, imagine what entire missing collections could do. Were there stories that described the Anunnaki not as distant gods, but as rulers walking among men? Did some tablets record the origins of kingship more clearly, perhaps even linking it directly to these enigmatic figures? The mystery deepens when we consider how later traditions hint at knowledge older than the texts we possess. The Sumerian king list, for example, speaks of rulers who reigned for impossibly long lifespans before a great flood. Some scholars read these as symbolic, a way of exaggerating the glory of ancient kings. Others wonder, are we missing the texts that explain why these lifespans were tied so closely to the Anunnaki? If those tablets ever existed, they have yet to be found. Even in collections already uncovered, many tablets remain untranslated or only partially understood. Thousands sit in storage, awaiting the slow work of decipherment. Some are mislabeled, overlooked, or deemed too fragmentary to piece together. Could it be that answers to the Anunnaki mystery already exist in these forgotten corners of archives, waiting for a fresh set of eyes to bring them to light? Then there is the question of destruction. In recent decades, wars and looting have devastated archaeological sites across Iraq and beyond. Priceless tablets have been smashed, burned, or trafficked into private collections where they may never resurface. What knowledge vanished with them? Could some have contained alternative versions of myths, versions that painted the Anunnaki in a very different light? From a speculative perspective, some writers argue that missing tablets might reveal technologies or knowledge that the ancients attributed to their gods. Others suggest they could contain more explicit accounts of the Anunnaki's relationship with humanity. Were they creators, overseers, or something altogether stranger? These ideas remain controversial, but they persist, precisely because the gaps in the record invite them. And so, we are left with a haunting paradox. The story of the Anunnaki is both one of discovery and of absence. Each new tablet adds to the mosaic of Mesopotamian thought, yet every gap in the record looms just as large, reminding us of what we do not know. Could the missing pieces, if ever found, confirm the gods as symbols of nature and order? Or might they open the door to interpretations we have not yet dared to imagine? As we gaze at the fragments, cracked and incomplete, we cannot help but wonder, are the greatest secrets of the Anunnaki still buried in the earth, hidden in lost libraries, or resting silently in private hands? And if one day they resurface, will we be ready for what they reveal? Among the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia, fragments of clay tablets glisten faintly under museum lights, their wedge-shaped impressions frozen in time. At first glance, they appear to be nothing more than lists, calculations, or ritual prayers. But upon closer study, some reveal something far more astonishing. Records of the heavens, carefully charted with a precision that seems, to many, centuries ahead of its time. Could the Anunnaki, the mysterious figures who appear so often in these texts, have possessed advanced astronomical knowledge? Mesopotamia has long been called the cradle of astronomy. As early as the 3rd millennium BC, scribes were tracking the movements of the moon, the planets, and the stars with remarkable accuracy. The Babylonians, inheritors of Sumerian traditions, would later develop methods of predicting lunar eclipses and plotting the paths of Venus. These achievements are celebrated as milestones of human observation. Yet, one cannot help but ask, where did this knowledge originate? Were these skills developed gradually? Or did the earliest scribes already inherit something more sophisticated than we assume? In texts such as Enuma Elish and the mythological hymns, the Anunnaki are depicted as cosmic beings, their actions tied not only to Earth, but to the very ordering of the skies. Some scholars argue that these are poetic expressions, mythological ways of explaining natural cycles. Yet others point out how strikingly consistent the alignments are between myth and measurable astronomy. Temples at Ur and Nippur, for example, were carefully oriented to the cardinal points and celestial events. Did this reflect mere agricultural necessity, or could it suggest a deeper, inherited system of knowledge linked to the gods themselves? Consider the so-called Emwel APN tablets, a series of Babylonian astronomical compendiums believed to preserve much older traditions. They list star constellations, rising and setting times, and even divisions of the year. These texts read like handbooks of celestial science. And yet, curiously, many of the stars they describe are linked to divine figures, sometimes even to the Anunnaki. Did the ancients view their gods as rulers of the sky because they personified the heavens? Or because they believed the Anunnaki themselves imparted this cosmic wisdom? Speculation intensifies when we examine Mesopotamian depictions of gods holding objects that resemble measuring tools or spheres. To the cautious historian, these are symbols of power, order, or ritual. But to more speculative voices, they look uncannily like instruments of navigation, perhaps even of astronomy. Could these be echoes of a lost science veiled in myth? And then there is the riddle of planetary knowledge. Some ancient texts appear to reference celestial bodies that should not have been visible to the naked eye. The Sumerians, for instance, described the heavens as divided among gods, with detailed associations to specific planets. But how could they have charted worlds like Uranus or Neptune, which remain invisible without telescopes? Did these passages reflect symbolic storytelling, or something that hints at a knowledge base we have not fully grasped? This is where modern interpretations diverge sharply. Mainstream Assyriologists caution that many of these claims are based on mistranslations or imaginative leaps. The Sumerians, they argue, were not modern astronomers but careful observers of the skies, recording patterns for religious and agricultural purposes. Yet even this admission leaves us with questions. How did such early civilizations, without advanced instruments, achieve mathematical models sophisticated enough to predict eclipses centuries in advance? Why do some myths appear to encode planetary motions with striking accuracy? Speculative theories, popularized in the 20th century, go further. Writers like Zecharia Sitchin suggested that the Anunnaki themselves were extraterrestrial visitors who passed down advanced astronomical knowledge, particularly linked to the mysterious planet Nibiru. While mainstream academia rejects this claim, it remains a compelling idea for many, precisely because of the gaps and puzzles that orthodox explanations cannot fully resolve. Could the myths of the Anunnaki as cosmic figures have been rooted in something more literal? Or were they simply metaphors, encoding natural rhythms in the only language their time allowed? Archaeology continues to uncover new pieces of this puzzle. Tablets once thought mundane reveal patterns of celestial cataloging that grow more sophisticated the deeper we study them. Could some of these records trace back not only to agricultural needs, but to mythic memories of a time when the gods themselves, Anunnaki or otherwise, were seen as architects of the skies? We may never know for certain, but as we trace the wedge-shaped impressions across crumbling clay, the question lingers. Did the Anunnaki truly possess advanced astronomical knowledge that shaped the foundations of Mesopotamian science? Or is the sophistication we perceive merely the brilliance of human observation, magnified by time and mystery? And perhaps most tantalizing of all, if fragments of such knowledge survived on the tablets we now hold, what might still lie hidden in the missing texts or in the sands yet unturned? Could they reveal the full scope of the Anunnaki's connection to the stars, or leave us with even deeper mysteries? Beneath the scorching plains of Mesopotamia lie layers of earth that have swallowed entire civilizations. Cities like Uruk and Eridu, once bustling centers of ritual and trade, are today little more than mounds of clay and stone, their secrets buried in silence. Yet ancient myths suggest that not only humans, but even the gods themselves had connections to the underworld. Among them, the Anunnaki are sometimes described not as distant rulers of the skies, but as beings who dwelled deep beneath the surface. In Mesopotamian belief, the underworld, called Kur or Irkalla, was a shadowy domain where the dead resided, ruled over by Ereshkigal, the goddess of the great below. The Anunnaki appear here as judges of the underworld, presiding over the fates of the departed. These depictions differ sharply from tales of the Anunnaki as celestial figures tied to the heavens. How could one group of beings be associated with both the stars above and the realms below? Were they cosmic, earthly, or something in between? The myths are layered and often ambiguous. In the famous descent of Inanna, the goddess of love and war ventures into the underworld. There she encounters the Anunnaki seated as grim judges, their gaze fixed upon her as she stands trial. These gods of the deep are described as fearsome and unyielding, beings who hold power over what lies beyond life. Yet in other contexts, the same name, Anunnaki, refers to divine figures who grant kingship, decree destinies, and interact with humanity in the world of the living. Does this reflect a single group of gods whose roles shifted, or multiple traditions that merged over time? Archaeology offers intriguing clues. Many Mesopotamian temples contained subterranean chambers, sometimes filled with offerings or designed for secret rituals. Were these spaces symbolic entrances to the underworld, or did they serve practical purposes tied to storage and ceremony? Some scholars suggest that myths of the Anunnaki underground could have been inspired by such hidden places where priests descended to perform rites away from the public eye. But others look deeper. Across cultures there is a recurring theme: gods, ancestors, or mysterious beings who dwell beneath the earth. From the Greek Hades to the Mayan Xibalba, from Egyptian tomb rituals to Mesopotamian Kur, the motif is widespread. Why does this image appear again and again? Could it be a symbolic reflection of death and rebirth, or does it hint at something more? A memory of beings who truly inhabited hidden realms beneath the surface? Speculative theories have emerged, fueled by these ambiguities. Some writers propose that myths of the Anunnaki dwelling underground could describe advanced beings retreating into subterranean structures, whether literal bases, vast caverns, or symbolic metaphors for hidden knowledge. Could it be that these tales preserve distorted memories of something extraordinary? Even within the mainstream study of Mesopotamian religion, questions remain. Why did the same pantheon of gods sometimes appear as celestial, sometimes terrestrial, and sometimes underworldly? Was this simply the result of evolving myths across centuries? Or did the ancients themselves perceive their gods as multidimensional, able to move between realms, inhabiting sky, earth, and underworld alike? When we recall how often Mesopotamian texts are fragmentary, the picture becomes even murkier. Missing lines, broken tablets, and contradictory sources leave gaps that scholars struggle to reconcile. Could there have been entire narratives that explained why the Anunnaki sat in judgment below, while also commanding the order of the stars above? Without those lost tablets, the question remains suspended in uncertainty. Modern excavations sometimes bring us startlingly close to these mysteries. Beneath ziggurats, the massive temple towers that dominated Mesopotamian cities, archaeologists have found networks of passages, chambers, and foundations. Officially, these served as structural supports or storerooms. Yet, for those drawn to the mythic imagination, they stir another possibility. Were these architectural choices linked to the belief in gods who themselves moved between surface and subterranean worlds? The ambiguity invites reflection. If the Anunnaki were associated with both heavens and underworld, what does that tell us about how the ancients understood the divine? Did they see their gods not as fixed beings in one place, but as forces present in every realm? Or does the duality conceal something stranger? Perhaps a story of beings whose true dwelling place has never been fully understood? As we trace these myths, one thing becomes clear. The image of the Anunnaki is not simple nor consistent. They are both givers of kingship and judges of the dead, rulers of destiny and silent watchers in the depths. Could the truth of their dwelling place lie somewhere beyond our categories, between metaphor and memory, symbol and reality? The cracked tablets whisper fragments but never full answers. And so, the question lingers in the shadows of Mesopotamia's buried cities. Did the Anunnaki dwell underground, in the underworld of myth and ritual? Or is this image a veil, concealing a truth we have yet to uncover? High on the windswept hills of ancient Palestine, weathered stones rise from the earth, remnants of a world long vanished. Among them, myths and scriptures speak of beings who were neither fully human nor entirely divine. The Bible refers to them as the Nephilim, giants, the offspring of mysterious unions between the sons of God and the daughters of men. Their presence casts a shadow of awe and dread, echoing across centuries. But in the background of this narrative, scholars and seekers alike ask a provocative question. Could the Nephilim be connected, in some way, to the Anunnaki of Mesopotamian lore? The parallels are striking. In Sumerian and Akkadian texts, the Anunnaki are described as powerful beings, descended from the heavens, who shaped human destinies and once walked among mortals. In biblical tradition, the Nephilim appear as towering figures, born of unions between divine beings and humankind. Both stories point to an era when the boundary between gods and humans was blurred, when the earth was said to be shared by beings of extraordinary stature and influence. In the book of Genesis, the Nephilim are mentioned briefly but ominously, described as mighty men of old, men of renown. Their presence precedes the story of the Great Flood, suggesting that their existence was bound up with human corruption and divine judgment. This recalls Mesopotamian flood myths, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the gods decide to destroy humanity, citing overpopulation, noise, or defiance. Could these shared traditions point to a common cultural memory, an ancient tale of powerful beings who walked the earth before catastrophe swept them away? Historians often explain these similarities through cultural exchange. Mesopotamia and the lands of ancient Palestine were not isolated. Trade, conquest, and migration carried myths from one region to another. Stories of the Anunnaki could have filtered westward, transforming over time into the biblical Nephilim. What began as divine judges or sky-born rulers may have been reshaped into figures of biblical warning. But the mystery deepens when we look beyond surface comparisons. The word Nephilim itself is uncertain in meaning. Some scholars translate it as fallen ones, while others suggest giants. Both interpretations carry echoes of the Anunnaki, beings who were both celestial and subterranean, judges of the underworld and rulers of the heavens. Were the Nephilim remembered as fallen Anunnaki, beings cast down from the realm of the divine? Archaeology adds to the intrigue. Throughout the ancient Near East, legends persist of giant rulers and massive structures attributed to them. From towering walls to cyclopean stones, traditions credit impossible feats of construction to beings larger and stronger than any ordinary human. While mainstream archaeology attributes these achievements to organized labor and ingenuity, the persistence of giant myths raises questions. Why did so many cultures, from Mesopotamia to Canaan, embed stories of colossal beings in their heritage? Were they metaphors for power, or distorted memories of something real? Some researchers turn to more speculative theories. They suggest that the Anunnaki and the Nephilim were not merely mythic constructs, but memories of encounters with advanced beings, figures whose knowledge, size, or presence was so beyond the ordinary that it inspired legends of gods and giants. Could the stories of divine unions, of beings descending from the heavens, be attempts to describe something humanity could not fully comprehend? Yet others urge caution. The texts themselves are fragmentary and symbolic, shaped by religious and cultural context. To equate the Anunnaki with the Nephilim may oversimplify complex traditions that developed over thousands of years. Still, the overlaps are difficult to ignore. Celestial descent, human-divine unions, judgment through flood, and beings whose influence lingers even after their disappearance. The question then lingers: are these merely coincidences born of shared human imagination, or fragments of a deeper story carried across civilizations? If the Anunnaki and the Nephilim are connected, does that suggest a common origin for these myths? Perhaps a memory of events long forgotten, or of beings whose nature has been obscured by time? Standing among the ruins of ancient cities, one cannot help but wonder. Did the same figures who judged the dead in Mesopotamian underworld myths also walk the hills of Palestine as towering giants remembered in Scripture? Or are we glimpsing, through fragmented traditions, humanity's attempt to describe encounters with forces too vast, too extraordinary to fit neatly into our categories of gods, men, or myths? The answers remain buried in broken tablets, weathered scrolls, and the silence of forgotten centuries. And so, the mystery endures, inviting us to ask, were the Nephilim of the Bible and the Anunnaki of Mesopotamia two names for the same enigmatic beings, or do they belong to separate worlds of myth that only appear to converge? In the dim light of a museum hall, a stone relief from ancient Mesopotamia comes into view. The figure carved into its surface is tall, solemn, and commanding. Atop its head sits a curious headdress, a crown shaped not with jewels or metals, but with horns, stylized, curving upward in deliberate symmetry. For centuries, this image has puzzled scholars and stirred speculation. Why did the artists of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon so often depict their gods, and sometimes their rulers, wearing horned crowns? And why are such crowns so frequently tied to representations of the Anunnaki? The horned crown was not a casual detail. In Mesopotamian art, it became one of the most recognizable markers of divinity. Reliefs and cylinder seals dating back to the 3rd millennium BC consistently portray gods distinguished from mortals by this headdress. The more tiers of horns a crown bore, the higher the rank of the deity. It was a symbol of hierarchy, cosmic order, and power. But behind this clear visual language lies a deeper mystery. Why horns? Why would ancient civilizations, surrounded by fertile plains and monumental ziggurats, associate divinity with the features of animals? One explanation points to the natural world that shaped Mesopotamian life. Cattle, sheep, and goats were central to survival, wealth, and sacrifice. Horns, sharp and strong, symbolized vitality, aggression, and fertility. To place such features atop a divine figure may have been a way of signifying untamed strength and cosmic authority. Just as the bull represented force and virility, the horned crown may have reflected a god's overwhelming power over life and death. Yet the imagery does not end with simple symbolism. Many depictions link horned crowns directly to the Anunnaki, the pantheon of deities believed to govern both the heavens and the underworld. On seals and tablets, figures identified with this enigmatic group often wear horned headdresses, as though their authority were inseparable from this emblem. Did the horns merely mark them as divine, or did they hint at something more? Comparisons with other cultures only deepen the puzzle. In Egypt, sacred headdresses also bore horns, often framing solar discs or entwined with serpents. In the Levant, horned altars and figurines appear in archaeological sites. Even in later traditions across Europe and Asia, horned helmets or crowns symbolized gods, warriors, or beings set apart from ordinary humanity. Could this shared motif point to a universal archetype, an ancient attempt to represent contact with beings who seemed beyond human comprehension? Speculative theories go further still. Some suggest the horned crown may have been inspired not by animals, but by memory of something technological. Headgear, helmets, or devices worn by figures who came to be remembered as gods. Were the horns symbolic antennae, stylized memories of equipment long lost to time? Or did they represent an attempt to capture in stone what early witnesses could not fully understand? Mainstream scholars caution against such leaps, emphasizing that Mesopotamian art followed strict conventions. The horned crown, they argue, was a codified symbol of divinity, no more literal than a halo in medieval Christian art. It told viewers at a glance that the figure before them was not mortal. Yet even with this explanation, the persistence of the horned motif across distant cultures raises questions that remain difficult to dismiss. Adding another layer of intrigue, certain rulers also adopted the horned crown in their imagery, blurring the line between human kingship and divine authority. By wearing horns, a king visually aligned himself with the Anunnaki, presenting himself not merely as chosen by the gods, but perhaps as embodying their presence on Earth. This blending of human and divine identity resonates with broader Mesopotamian beliefs, where the boundaries between men and gods often dissolved in myth. Was the horned crown simply propaganda, or was it a reflection of something the ancients truly believed, that rulers walked the earth with the sanction, or even the essence, of beings from beyond? The question lingers as we gaze at these ancient carvings. Were the horns symbols of fertility, echoes of pastoral life elevated into divine iconography? Were they artistic shorthand for cosmic power? Or do they conceal, in stylized stone, the memory of encounters with beings whose appearance, presence, or technology defied understanding? The reliefs remain silent, their figures gazing out across millennia with horned crowns still intact. And we, much like the first archaeologists who uncovered them, are left to wonder, what exactly were the ancients trying to tell us? Were these horns mere symbols or fragments of a story still waiting to be uncovered, hidden in the silent language of stone? In a quiet library, rows of books stretch into shadow. Dust clings to volumes untouched for decades, their spines marked with titles on ancient civilizations and forgotten gods. Among them lies a series that, in the late 20th century, sparked fascination, debate, and controversy. The Earth Chronicles by Zecharia Sitchin. His work, rooted in the mysterious figures of the Anunnaki, would reshape their story in ways that still ripple through modern culture. But how did one man's interpretations come to redefine an ancient mystery? Sitchin, born in the early 20th century, was not a trained Assyriologist or historian. Yet his lifelong interest in the languages and myths of Mesopotamia drew him to study cuneiform texts, those wedge-shaped impressions pressed into clay thousands of years ago. While mainstream scholars offered translations that placed the Anunnaki firmly within the realm of myth and religion, Sitchin suggested something far more radical. He argued that these ancient writings were not symbolic allegories, but historical accounts, records of beings who came to Earth from another world. The heart of Sitchin's reinterpretation lay in the word Anunnaki. To him, it did not simply mean princes of the royal seed or offspring of Anu, as traditional scholars explained. Instead, he broke down the Sumerian roots to argue it meant those who from heaven to earth came. The implication was extraordinary. The Anunnaki were not abstract deities, but visitors, flesh and blood beings who descended from the skies. According to Sitchin, these beings hailed from a distant planet he called Nibiru, an unseen member of our solar system on a long elliptical orbit. He claimed that when the Sumerians wrote of gods arriving from the heavens, they were describing extraterrestrials traveling from this hidden world. Where others saw poetic myth, Sitchin saw encoded memory, records of contact between humanity and another species. But his vision went even further. Sitchin proposed that the Anunnaki came to Earth in search of resources, particularly gold, which he believed they required to stabilize their planet's atmosphere. And in Mesopotamian myths describing the creation of humankind, Sitchin found not metaphor, but evidence of genetic engineering. He suggested that the Anunnaki, burdened by the toil of mining, created humans as a servant race, fashioned by blending their own DNA with that of early hominids. For many, this radical retelling raised a haunting question. Were we shaped by gods or by visitors from beyond the stars? Mainstream historians, archaeologists, and linguists have been clear in their response. They reject Sitchin's translations and interpretations. To them, his breakdowns of Sumerian words often stray far from established linguistic standards. They argue that no Sumerian text explicitly mentions Nibiru as a planet, nor describes the Anunnaki as spacefaring beings. Instead, the Anunnaki are portrayed in conventional scholarship as a pantheon, associated with the heavens, the earth, and the underworld, but firmly rooted in mythology. And yet, despite scholarly dismissal, Sitchin's vision captured imaginations around the world. His books sold millions of copies, were translated into multiple languages, and inspired generations of readers to question the official narrative of human history. His ideas helped fuel the rise of ancient astronaut theories, influencing television programs, documentaries, and popular culture. For some, his work opened a door to alternative possibilities. For others, it blurred the line between history and speculation. What makes Sitchin's narrative so compelling? Perhaps it is the way he transformed abstract myths into tangible events. The Anunnaki, once distant figures in the realm of gods, became beings with motives, needs, and technology. The ancient stories, rather than allegories, became fragments of history. His interpretations gave weight to mysteries that mainstream explanations often seemed to resolve too neatly. And yet, one must ask, if Sitchin was mistaken, why do his ideas endure? Is it simply the allure of mystery, the human desire to believe in forces beyond ourselves? Or could it be that within the clay tablets, amid the broken lines and damaged fragments, there remains room for questions, gaps in the record that invite speculation? Standing before an ancient Mesopotamian tablet, its lines etched thousands of years ago, one cannot help but feel the pull of that uncertainty. What were the scribes truly describing? Did they mean to depict gods as humans imagined them, or beings they believed they had encountered? Were their myths purely symbolic, or were they echoes of something history has since buried? Zecharia Sitchin may not have solved the mystery of the Anunnaki, but he reframed it, casting them not as distant deities, but as potential visitors from another world. In doing so, he challenged us to see the ancient past not as settled fact, but as a puzzle still open to interpretation. And perhaps that is the true legacy of his work. Not certainty, but curiosity. The tablets remain, the stories endure, and the horned crowns of the gods still stare back at us from stone reliefs. But as long as interpretations differ, one question lingers in the shadows. Do we read the myths of the Anunnaki as allegory, or as memory of a forgotten reality? Beneath the scorching sun of Giza, massive stone blocks rise in silent defiance of time. The pyramids, aligned with uncanny precision, have long stirred the question of origins. Thousands of miles away, in the jungles of Mesoamerica, stepped pyramids tower above the canopy, their surfaces carved with glyphs depicting gods who descended from the heavens. In India, ancient temples stand adorned with figures of celestial beings, half human and half divine, who guided kings and battled demons. And across these distant lands, separated by oceans and centuries, a curious thread of similarity emerges. Myths of powerful beings who arrived from the skies, beings that some claim echo the Mesopotamian Anunnaki. How can cultures so far apart tell stories that seem to mirror one another? Is this the mark of human imagination repeating universal themes, or could it suggest something deeper, shared memory, or even shared contact? Mainstream historians often point to archetypes. Myths of gods descending from the heavens appear across the world because they reflect human observation of the sky, the stars, and natural forces beyond control. The sun, the rain, the lightning. These phenomena inspired personification, creating divine figures that watched over humanity. In this interpretation, the Anunnaki were Mesopotamia's version of a larger human tendency, no more connected to Egypt's Ra or India's Devas than they were to the storm gods of Scandinavia. Yet the similarities can be striking. In Egypt, the god Osiris was linked with teaching agriculture and civilization, echoing Enki, who was credited with guiding humankind. In India, the Rig Veda describes the Devas as beings who wage wars in the heavens, reminiscent of the rivalries between Enlil, Enki, and their kin. Among the Maya, stories of gods descending from the stars and imparting knowledge bear uncanny resemblance to tales of the Anunnaki shaping early humans. Is this simply coincidence, or a sign of a common root? The architectural parallels only deepen the mystery. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, rising in layered steps toward the heavens, find visual cousins in the pyramids of Egypt and the stepped temples of Teotihuacan. Mainstream explanations attribute this to practical engineering. Stacking wide bases into narrowing tiers is a stable method for building tall structures. But others wonder, were these monumental designs inspired by a shared memory of mountains built to honor sky beings, or even as landing platforms for the gods themselves? Speculative theories push the question further. Some propose that the spread of these myths reflects not independent invention, but contact. Could travelers from Mesopotamia have carried stories of the Anunnaki across seas and deserts, influencing distant cultures? Or, in the more radical view, could the Anunnaki themselves, if they were truly visitors, have appeared in different lands, leaving behind local variations of the same cosmic tale? Zecharia Sitchin suggested that the Anunnaki's presence was not confined to Mesopotamia. He argued that their influence extended worldwide, that they were remembered under many names, as the Nephilim of biblical texts, as gods of Egypt, as devas in India, and as feathered serpents like Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica. While scholars reject these connections, insisting there is no direct textual or archaeological evidence to link them, The persistence of cross-cultural parallels keeps the question alive. There is also the enigma of timing. The earliest Sumerian writings, dating back to the 3rd millennium BC, already describe the Anunnaki as ancient and powerful. Around the same period, Egypt's pyramids were rising, and the Indus Valley civilization was flourishing with its own religious traditions. Could these simultaneous developments hint at an underlying connection, or simply at the parallel growth of human ingenuity across regions? Archaeologists stress that contact between these distant civilizations is unlikely, especially in such early periods. Yet we know that ancient people were capable of remarkable journeys. The spread of obsidian, lapis lazuli, and other traded goods shows that networks of exchange extended farther than once thought. If trade could span great distances, could stories travel too? Still, the similarities are not perfect. The Anunnaki are often depicted as a council of deities tied to earth, sky, and the underworld. Egyptian gods, though sometimes sharing roles of judgment and creation, followed a different cosmology. Indian myths describe cycles of cosmic time and divine battles that span ages. And in Mesoamerica, the gods often wore forms distinct from those of Mesopotamia. Does this diversity suggest independent invention, or the fading echoes of a shared older story reshaped by each culture? Standing before the Great Pyramid of Chichen Itza, its steps leading upward to the heavens, one cannot help but recall the terraced ziggurats of Ur. Were these monuments independent testaments to human aspiration, or silent witnesses to something forgotten? The mystery lingers, for the connections remain tantalizing yet unproven. Scholars continue to emphasize caution, warning against forcing links where none exist. Yet the human imagination resists closure. We look at the shared myths of sky beings, of gods who shaped humanity, of rivalries among the divine, and we wonder, why do such stories appear again and again across continents, across millennia? Could the myths of the Anunnaki be more than the heritage of Mesopotamia? Could they be fragments of a memory once shared by civilizations now lost? Or are we, in seeking connection, simply revealing the universality of human wonder, repeating the same questions in many tongues? Rising from the dust of ancient Mesopotamia, vast stair-stepped structures dominate the flat horizon. These are the ziggurats, towering platforms of mud brick and stone, constructed thousands of years ago by the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians. Their bases stretch wide, their sides ascend in terraced layers, and at their summits, shrines once touched the sky. Unlike the smooth pyramids of Egypt, ziggurats were monumental stairways, reaching upward as if to bridge the space between earth and the heavens. The best preserved, the ziggurat of Ur, still looms in southern Iraq, a colossal testament to human ambition. Its massive staircases rise in stages, once painted in vivid colors, leading worshippers toward the sacred temple at the top. Archaeologists note that ziggurats were not spaces for the public, but restricted areas where priests performed rituals honoring the gods. From the ground, the structure seemed to lift the temple above the world of mortals, placing it closer to the divine. But what precisely was the purpose of these immense platforms? Were they symbolic mountains in a flat land? Or, as some suggest, ritual stages designed not only for gods, but for beings remembered as the Anunnaki? Mainstream scholarship emphasizes their religious and political roles. The Mesopotamians believed gods resided in the heavens yet could descend to earth. The ziggurat was a bridge, a stairway for gods, a stage for priests, maintaining harmony between mortal and divine. Inscriptions describe temples as the bond between heaven and earth, with the ziggurat as the towering foundation. Speculation arises when considering their scale, precision, and persistence. Why build such massive structures if smaller temples sufficed? Why the monumental staircases leading upward as if for beings greater than humans? Could the ziggurat have been a platform, ritual or otherwise, intended for the Anunnaki themselves? Zecharia Sitchin and others proposed that these structures may have served dual purposes, both temples and functional sites where the Anunnaki descended from the skies. Some theorists suggest flat summits could have acted as landing platforms for celestial craft, interpreting stairways to heaven not as metaphors, but as physical descriptions. Imagery of gods descending in fiery chariots, recorded in Mesopotamian and later texts, fuels such ideas. Were the ziggurats designed with this in mind? Archaeologists firmly reject these interpretations. No evidence suggests ziggurats were anything other than religious monuments. Their solid cores, built from layers of sun-dried brick, were engineered to support temples that withstood floods and time. Still, unanswered details linger. Despite extensive study, little is known about what occurred in shrines at their summits. Access was limited to priests and rulers. The rituals conducted there were rarely recorded in detail. What happened on those heights, hidden from ordinary eyes? The symbolic function of the ziggurat also raises intrigue. In Mesopotamian cosmology, mountains were meeting points between earth and sky. Ziggurats, in the absence of natural peaks, recreated that sacred geography. But was this symbolism merely poetic, or did it reflect memories of encounters with beings from above? If the Anunnaki were believed to descend to Earth, would such towering platforms not serve as fitting stages for their arrival? Similarities to later sacred architecture deepen the question. Across the world, civilizations built stepped monuments, the pyramids of Mesoamerica, the temples of Cambodia, the terraced sanctuaries of the Andes. Mainstream explanations point to parallel invention, shaped by practical engineering and shared human symbolism. Yet some see parallels as a global memory of sky beings who demanded towering platforms for descent. Could the ziggurat have been the prototype, the original stairway to heaven, echoed across continents? Even ancient texts feed the mystery. Descriptions of Babylon's Enki call it the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Myths describe gods gathering in these towering sanctuaries. Did people believe deities physically occupied shrines, walking among them? Or did the imagery preserve something stranger, encounters with beings not of this world? Standing before Ur's ziggurat today, wind whipping across the desert, one can imagine priests climbing staircases carrying offerings to the gods. But one can also imagine something else. The structure as a stage for a spectacle now lost. A meeting between humans and the Anunnaki. The debate remains unresolved. To archaeologists, the ziggurat is a feat of engineering and faith, a symbolic mountain on Mesopotamia's flat earth. To others, it is a clue to forgotten encounters, a trace of something extraordinary. And so the question lingers. Were these stair-stepped towers merely temples, or ritual platforms for beings from the skies? If the answer lies buried beneath Iraq's sands, it has yet to be uncovered. And until it is, the ziggurats will continue as silent guardians of a mystery humanity has not yet solved. In the quiet of the desert, as the sun sets over the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia, the baked mud brick walls cast long shadows across the sand. These are the remnants of a civilization that once looked to the heavens for answers, tracing the paths of stars and planets with astonishing accuracy. It was here that stories of the Anunnaki first took shape, beings said to descend from the sky to dwell among humans. But just as curious as their arrival is another mystery that lingers in the myths: the departure of the Anunnaki, their sudden absence from the world they once ruled. The earliest Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki as divine judges, presiding over both the heavens and the underworld. They were present in creation myths, agricultural rites, and tales of kingship. Yet scattered among these narratives are accounts suggesting withdrawal, a time when the gods retreated from direct involvement with humanity. Why would beings so closely tied to human origins and survival choose to leave? In the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, hints of this departure emerge. Gilgamesh, two-thirds divine himself, seeks immortality by searching for Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood. But in his journey, he learns of the gods' decision to limit eternal life to their own realm, cutting off humanity from direct access. Some interpreters view this as a symbolic moment, reflecting the gods' distancing from human affairs. Could this have been a literary memory of something more? A recollection of beings who once walked the earth but then departed, leaving only stories behind? Other Mesopotamian myths describe disputes among the gods themselves. The Atrahasis epic tells of tensions between the higher gods, the Anunnaki, and the Igigi, younger deities forced into labor. Rebellion, flood, and compromise all shape the narrative. Yet, in the aftermath of the deluge, the gods' involvement in daily human life seems diminished. Did these tales preserve a cultural memory of the Anunnaki's withdrawal, an attempt to explain why divine presence was no longer as visible as before? Mainstream scholarship offers a simpler explanation. The departure of the gods was a literary device, reflecting shifts in religious practice as Mesopotamian society evolved. Temples changed hands, dynasties rose and fell, and with them, the emphasis on particular deities waxed and waned. The Anunnaki, once central, faded as new gods took prominence. The myths, then, were not describing a literal departure, but a theological transition. Yet the speculative theories tell another story. Zecharia Sitchin, whose reinterpretations of Mesopotamian texts reshaped modern discussions of the Anunnaki, suggested that these beings were not merely gods, but visitors from another world. According to his controversial readings, they came to Earth for resources, particularly gold, and when their mission was complete, they departed. Their sudden absence in myth, in this view, reflects a historical reality, the withdrawal of advanced beings who no longer had use for our world. Even outside of Sitchin's framework, the question of the gods' departure lingers in cultural memory. Across traditions, echoes of withdrawal appear. In the Hebrew Bible, adapted from earlier Mesopotamian themes, divine beings once walked among mortals before vanishing into distant heavens. In Mesoamerican lore, gods like Quetzalcoatl depart with promises to return. Could these be separate inventions, or do they reflect a shared memory of encounters with entities who came and went? One striking element is how often the departure is linked to destruction or cleansing. Flood myths, common across Mesopotamia and beyond, depict gods who intervene dramatically and then withdraw. Were these tales cautionary allegories meant to explain the fragility of divine favor, or did they encode memories of catastrophes after which once-present figures no longer returned? Standing at the base of the ziggurat of Ur, one can almost imagine the final ceremonies. Priests climbing the steps with offerings, gazing toward the heavens, hoping for the return of gods who no longer answered. Did the Anunnaki leave gradually, their presence fading as generations passed? Or was there a decisive moment, a departure so abrupt that it echoed in myth for millennia? For archaeologists, the departure is a symbol of cultural evolution, the natural shift of religious imagination over time. For others, it remains a haunting possibility that myths preserve fragments of an extraordinary encounter with beings whose reasons for leaving remain as mysterious as their arrival. And so the question remains, suspended between history and legend. What myths describe the Anunnaki leaving Earth, and why? Were they divine figures whose absence marked a spiritual transformation? Or were they something else entirely? Beings whose withdrawal left humanity staring at the stars, wondering when or if they might return. Beneath the blistering sun of southern Mesopotamia, the land stretches out in shades of clay and stone. Dry riverbeds cut across plains once fertile with crops, and scattered ruins whisper of cities long abandoned. Amid these remains, stories endure, etched on cuneiform tablets that speak of gods and men, of toil and labor, and of resources wrested from the earth. Among them is a recurring theme that has intrigued scholars and fueled speculation alike: the suggestion that the Anunnaki were not only deities of myth, but overseers of labor, perhaps even of mining and resource control. The Atrahasis epic, one of the most important Mesopotamian texts, tells of a time when lesser gods, known as the Igigi, were tasked with hard labor. They dug canals, maintained fields, and toiled in service of the Anunnaki. Eventually, the Igigi rebelled, weary of their endless work. To resolve the crisis, humans were created, fashioned from clay mixed with divine essence, to bear the burden of labor in their place. On the surface, this is a creation myth explaining humanity's role in relation to the gods. But beneath the metaphor lies an intriguing detail. Why such emphasis on physical labor, on toil linked so explicitly to the earth itself? Some scholars view this as a reflection of Mesopotamian society. Agriculture, irrigation, and construction defined daily life, and myths often mirrored human struggles. In this reading, the gods' demand for labor was a symbolic representation of the relationship between rulers and subjects. The Anunnaki embodied authority, while the Igigi represented the working class. Humanity's creation, then, was a poetic way of explaining the hierarchy that governed society. Yet others have asked whether these stories carry a more literal undertone. Zecharia Sitchin, whose interpretations of Sumerian texts continue to spark debate, argued that the Anunnaki came to Earth not merely as divine overseers, but as beings seeking resources, most notably gold. According to his controversial readings, the rebellion of the Igigi was not about canals or fields, but about mining. Human beings, he suggested, were created to take over this labor, to dig and extract resources the Anunnaki needed for purposes beyond our comprehension. Gold, in particular, carries symbolic weight. In ancient Mesopotamia, it was prized for ritual and ornament, though not in the vast quantities Sitchin envisioned. Why, then, would myth emphasize resource extraction? Was it merely a reflection of agricultural labor, or could it hint at something else, an echo of an era when control over natural wealth was central to survival? Archaeological evidence does not confirm mining on the scale described in speculative theories. Mesopotamia itself was not rich in mineral resources. Copper, tin, and precious stones were often imported from distant lands. This reliance on trade networks made resource control a pressing issue for Mesopotamian rulers. The myths, then, may have reflected this concern, casting the gods as controllers of the very elements upon which civilization depended. Still, questions linger. Why did these stories so often describe divine dissatisfaction with labor, rebellion, and the substitution of humans for gods? Could these have been allegories for deeper truths, memories of a time when resource extraction was of paramount importance, even sanctified by divine narrative? The theme of mining is not unique to Mesopotamian myth. In South Africa, sites such as ancient gold mines have fueled speculation about prehistoric resource extraction. Some theorists link these distant traditions, suggesting a global pattern of myths that recall divine beings directing humanity to dig, to labor, to bring forth treasures from the earth. Are these merely coincidences, or could they point to a shared memory of something more? Standing before the worn tablets of the Atrahasis or the Enuma Elish, one cannot help but wonder, are these stories only the imaginative reflections of early societies, grappling with the weight of survival? Or are they fragments of a larger narrative, one in which the Anunnaki were remembered not only as rulers and judges, but as beings who demanded, and perhaps depended upon, humanity's ability to extract and control the resources of the earth. The silence of the ruins offers no answers. The tablets are incomplete, their lines broken, their meanings debated. Yet the questions remain, echoing across time, as persistent as the desert wind that sweeps across the plains where the first cities once rose. Did the Anunnaki stories truly describe mining and resource control? Or are we projecting modern questions onto ancient myth? And if they did, what purpose lay behind it? The mystery endures, leaving us to wonder whether hidden beneath the soil are not only the remnants of cities, but the untold secrets of humanity's earliest relationship with the gods. Deep within the climate-controlled vaults of modern museums, small fragments of clay rest under glass. They are etched with wedge-shaped impressions, faint but enduring. These cuneiform tablets, written nearly 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, describe the actions of gods and the destiny of men. To the untrained eye, they are simple marks of an ancient script. But to those who study them, they represent something more, a glimpse into humanity's oldest recorded memories. Within their lines lies a question that continues to stir both scholarly debate and speculative wonder. Could humans themselves carry genetic traces linked in some way to the Anunnaki? The Sumerian myths tell us that humanity was not created spontaneously, but deliberately. In the Atrahasis story, mankind is fashioned from clay mixed with the blood or essence of a slain god. The symbolism is powerful, humans as both of the earth and of the divine. Was this simply mythic poetry, or an ancient metaphor for a deeper truth? When viewed through the lens of modern genetics, the description begins to take on curious resonance. Science has revealed that all humans today share remarkable genetic similarities. Across continents and cultures, more than 99% of our DNA is identical. The remaining fraction holds the clues to variation, ancestry, and evolution. Geneticists have traced lineages back to early humans who walked the African savannas nearly 200,000 years ago. Fossil and DNA evidence paints a picture of migration, adaptation, and survival over immense spans of time. And yet, mysteries remain. The sudden appearance of advanced cognition, symbolic thought, and complex language in Homo sapiens raises questions still debated by anthropologists. Some argue for gradual evolution. Others note that the leap in intelligence seems abrupt, almost as if some event, shifted the trajectory of humanity. Could this leap be what ancient myths sought to explain? Could the story of the Anunnaki mingling divine essence with clay reflect an early attempt to describe genetic transformation? Theories on this possibility vary widely. Mainstream scholars emphasize that myths often use symbolic language to explain natural processes. The blood of the gods might simply have been a metaphor for life itself, the mysterious spark that animates the body. But alternative interpretations suggest more. Zecharia Sitchin, for instance, proposed that the Anunnaki were advanced beings who intentionally modified early humans, creating workers suited for labor. According to his reading, the ancient texts describe not metaphor, but memory, an intervention recorded in myth. Genetic science itself neither supports nor disproves such claims, but it does highlight anomalies worth considering. For example, the sudden expansion of the human brain, the genetic bottlenecks that hint at near-extinction events, and the presence of non-human DNA traces, such as Neanderthal and Denisovan genes, within modern humans. These discoveries raise questions about the complexity of our genetic heritage. Could there be other, as yet unidentified, contributors to the human story? Adding to the intrigue is the fact that cultures far from Mesopotamia echo similar themes. Myths in Mesoamerica describe gods shaping men from maize and blood. In Egypt, The creator god Khnum is said to have fashioned humans on a potter's wheel. In India, the Rig Veda speaks of humanity arising from the sacrifice of a cosmic being. Again and again, we see tales of humans shaped, molded, infused with something beyond themselves. Is this simply the universal language of myth? Or could it reflect shared memories of some transformative process? Modern geneticists continue to map the human genome with extraordinary precision. Yet for all the progress, the origins of certain traits remain obscure. Why did symbolic thought appear so suddenly? What triggered the rapid spread of agriculture, cities, and written language? Was it only the product of environment and chance? Or was there an element of guidance, as the ancient tablets suggest? These questions often tread into contested territory, where science, myth, and speculation blur. Most researchers dismiss the notion of extraterrestrial influence, pointing instead to natural selection and evolutionary pressures. Yet others argue that the myths are too consistent, too vivid to be dismissed entirely as imagination. Could the Anunnaki have been remembered not as literal gods, but as figures who played a role in shaping what humanity became? Standing before the tablets in their quiet cases, one is struck by their enduring power. The Sumerians had no knowledge of DNA, no microscopes, no genetic sequencing. Yet they spoke of life created through a blending of earthly and divine substance. How did they arrive at such imagery? Was it purely poetic, or was it rooted in experiences now beyond our reach? The silence of the artifacts does not answer. The cuneiform remains mute, offering fragments, not explanations. But the question persists, carried forward by both scholars and seekers. Do humans today carry within their very DNA the imprint of something more than evolution? Could the essence of the Anunnaki, or whatever they represented, still echo in the double helix of our genes? We may never know for certain, but the possibility lingers, like a faint whisper within the stones of ancient Mesopotamia, urging us to wonder what hidden stories still sleep within our blood. Beneath the shadows of ancient temples, where incense once drifted through vast stone halls and flickering oil lamps cast wavering light upon carved symbols, one question lingers. Did the wisdom of the Anunnaki survive through the hidden hands of secret priesthoods? Across civilizations, from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from the Levant to Greece, there has always existed a class of initiated guardians, men sworn to protect sacred knowledge, sometimes at the cost of their lives. But what knowledge were they preserving? Was it merely ritual and tradition, or something far more profound? We know from archaeology that Mesopotamian societies, dating back over 4,000 years, were structured around temples, monumental centers that were not only places of worship, but also banks, schools, and repositories of records. Priests stood at the center of this system, mediating between the divine and the human. Their role went beyond religion. They tracked the movements of the heavens, measured the seasons, and guarded texts inscribed on fragile clay tablets. Many of these tablets, unearthed in places like Ur and Nippur, contain hymns, prayers, and detailed astronomical observations. Yet some scholars have wondered, why were so many resources devoted to the meticulous recording of the stars? Was this simply agricultural necessity, or was it part of a deeper inheritance from beings the Sumerians themselves called the Anunnaki? As history advanced, this pattern repeated. In Egypt, the priests of Heliopolis and Thebes guarded their own corpus of hidden teachings, often concealed within initiation rituals. In Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries promised initiates access to secret knowledge not meant for the unprepared. In Palestine, too, priestly classes preserved texts within sacred archives, some of which were hidden away for centuries before resurfacing in desert caves. Time and again, we see the same motif: restricted knowledge, passed down through select circles, never fully revealed to the wider public. Could these echoes be remnants of an even older tradition, one stretching back to the era when stories of the Anunnaki dominated Mesopotamian belief? The mainstream view is clear enough. Priesthoods sought to maintain authority by controlling access to writing, rituals, and knowledge of the natural world. By claiming exclusive understanding of the divine order, they reinforced their role as indispensable intermediaries. But the myths add another layer. Some texts suggest that the gods themselves entrusted humans with me, the divine decrees or powers that sustained civilization, gifts carefully guarded within temples. Were these me tablets symbolic codes for human culture? Or could they have been instructions, knowledge systems, or even technologies beyond what we now imagine? Later traditions only deepen the mystery. Medieval alchemists, cloaked in secrecy, spoke of a hidden lineage of wisdom passed from Babylon to Egypt, from Greece to Europe. Hermetic texts attributed to Thoth or Hermes Trismegistus claimed to preserve ancient knowledge about the origins of the cosmos and the manipulation of matter. Even in the modern era, secret societies, from the Freemasons to the Rosicrucians, trace their symbolic heritage back to the builders of ancient temples. Are these simply romantic inventions, or could they be faint survival threads of something once taught by priesthoods who claimed connection to beings from beyond the earth? Archaeological evidence does not confirm such a link. There are no surviving documents that explicitly say, "The priests guard the knowledge of the Anunnaki." Yet the silence itself is provocative. Entire libraries, such as that of Alexandria, were lost to fire and conquest. Countless tablets remain buried, broken, or unread in museum basements. How much was erased, and how much remains just beyond our reach? And then there are the myths of deliberate concealment. In some traditions, sacred texts were said to be hidden away, locked in stone chambers, to await a future time when humanity would be ready to understand them. The Dead Sea Scrolls, found in caves sealed for nearly 2,000 years, are one striking example of knowledge preserved in secrecy, only to re-emerge in a later age. Could other caches of hidden writings, perhaps even records of the Anunnaki, still lie undiscovered beneath desert sands or temple ruins? One can also ask, why did so many cultures insist that knowledge had to be protected, veiled, even hidden from the uninitiated? Were they simply concerned with guarding power, or was there a deeper fear that misuse of certain knowledge could bring ruin? Ancient flood myths warn of civilizations destroyed for overreaching, for defying the gods, for seeking forbidden wisdom. Did priesthoods believe they were safeguarding humanity from repeating those mistakes? Or were they preserving secrets that might one day unlock a forgotten connection to beings remembered as gods, teachers, or rulers from the stars? The mystery persists in symbols, in rituals, in half-erased traditions that surface across the globe. From Mesopotamian cylinder seals to Egyptian temple inscriptions, from Gnostic texts to Masonic allegories, whispers of concealed wisdom remain. Each fragment raises a tantalizing possibility that beneath the surface of recorded history, there exists an unbroken chain of hidden knowledge passed through priesthoods whose origins may trace back to the age when the Anunnaki walked the earth. And so, we are left to wonder, do secret priesthoods still preserve knowledge not meant for all eyes? If such wisdom exists, what truths does it contain? Truths about humanity's past, its place in the cosmos, and perhaps its forgotten connection to those who once came down from the heavens. Across the deserts of Mesopotamia, the winds have long swept over sun-baked ruins, carrying whispers from civilizations that predate recorded history. Excavators uncover foundations of ziggurats, fragments of clay tablets, and stone reliefs, each a silent witness to a time when humans sought to touch the divine. Among these artifacts, Some have been interpreted, not without controversy, as evidence of the Anunnaki. But what precisely are these claims grounded in, and how do they intersect with the mainstream archaeological record? One of the most frequently cited pieces of evidence comes from Sumer itself, the cuneiform tablets. Thousands have been excavated from sites like Ur, Lagash, and Nippur. Most are administrative records, trade logs, and legal codes, chronicling the day-to-day lives of early urban society. Yet a subset, mythological texts such as the Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis epic, and the Eridu Genesis, describe gods descending from the heavens, creating humanity, assigning labor, and commanding the cosmos. To some, these accounts are more than literature. They are considered literal descriptions of the Anunnaki's presence and actions. Mainstream scholars interpret them symbolically as mythic storytelling. Still, for those who seek the extraordinary, the details appear startlingly specific. The assignment of work, the delineation of divine hierarchy, and the emphasis on gold, a precious metal tied to both survival and ritual. Artifacts extend beyond texts. Archaeological digs have revealed cylinder seals depicting anthropomorphic figures adorned with horned crowns, wielding rods and rings, and standing among humans in roles suggestive of authority and power. While academics describe these images as symbolic representations of deities, some suggest they portray beings who were once observed by humans, beings that the Sumerians called the Anunnaki. Could these seals encode memory rather than myth? And if so, what truths lie hidden in their iconography? There are also the so-called anomalous artifacts, often discussed in alternative archaeology circles. Intricately carved objects from Ur and Kish, peculiar statues with disproportionate features, or elongated skulls found in burials, have fueled speculation that the Anunnaki may have had different physiology than humans. Mainstream researchers generally explain these anomalies as artistic conventions or rare genetic variations. Yet the fascination persists. Why do so many cultures, separated by both time and geography, depict beings with unusual or hybrid characteristics? Is it coincidence? Or does it hint at a shared memory of beings unlike ordinary humans? Then there are the great structures themselves. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, constructed with precise engineering and aligned to celestial bodies, invite both awe and curiosity. Mainstream archaeology credits these edifices to human ingenuity and religious devotion. Still, alternative theorists argue that such feats of architecture, along with sophisticated urban planning, irrigation systems, and early metallurgy, suggest guidance from beings with advanced knowledge the Sumerians attributed to the Anunnaki. Could these monumental works be physical testimonies of a partnership between humans and otherworldly entities? Beyond Mesopotamia, echoes appear elsewhere. Proponents point to megalithic constructions in Egypt, India, and Mesoamerica, pyramids, temples, and astronomical observatories that seem to share design principles with Mesopotamian ziggurats. Some argue these similarities are evidence of a global influence, a shared source of knowledge that could be traced back to the same beings described in Sumerian texts. Critics counter that independent invention and convergent cultural evolution explain these patterns. Yet the allure of a common, ancient connection endures. Even in smaller discoveries, fragments of clay, stone, and metal are cited. Tiny inscriptions, once overlooked, are reinterpreted through modern lenses as schematics, star charts, or notations of celestial cycles. Could these be primitive engineering diagrams left behind by beings the Sumerians revered? Or are they merely human attempts to understand the night sky and organize communal labor? The line between interpretation and imagination blurs, yet the questions remain compelling. The debate is complicated by the incompleteness of the record. Thousands of tablets remain unexcavated or unread. Entire libraries may lie buried beneath desert sands. Many sites were destroyed or looted over centuries. With so much lost, scholars can only speculate about what further evidence might reveal. Could undiscovered artifacts offer confirmation, or will they deepen the mystery, revealing practices, knowledge, or technologies that challenge conventional understanding of human history? The fascination with Anunnaki evidence extends into the modern era. Museums and academic publications display fragments, seals, and tablets, yet online forums and private collectors fuel public intrigue with interpretations that the Sumerians themselves could never have anticipated. The artifacts speak silently, their meanings partially lost, waiting for human minds willing to wonder, question, and explore. Standing before the surviving relics, whether in Ur's excavation trenches, Baghdad's museums, or private collections, the observer is confronted with a profound tension. On one hand lies rigorous scholarship, painstakingly documenting human achievement. On the other, a whisper of possibility that behind these achievements, behind the myths and carvings, may lie traces of beings who shaped humanity in ways science cannot yet explain. And so, we are left with fragments of truth and the enduring allure of mystery. The cuneiform tablets, the seals, the ziggurats, and the anomalies together form a puzzle with pieces missing. Could these archaeological finds reveal the presence of the Anunnaki, or are they merely mirrors of human imagination? The answer remains elusive, hidden in the ruins, waiting for discovery, or for interpretation beyond the boundaries of what we currently accept. In dimly lit archives across Europe, where dust settles on tomes of forgotten languages, the echoes of colonial scholarship linger. It was here, in the libraries of the 18th and 19th centuries, that Western translators first began deciphering the cuneiform inscriptions of Mesopotamia. Their work would open a window into Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon, but it would also shape and sometimes distort the story of the Anunnaki for centuries to come. These translators, often working under the weight of empire, approached ancient texts through lenses colored by their own culture, religion, and assumptions. European scholars brought with them a worldview that emphasized hierarchy, order, and divine providence. When they encountered Sumerian references to gods descending from the heavens or rulers said to live for thousands of years, their interpretations were inevitably filtered through familiar frameworks, biblical parallels, Greco-Roman mythology, and classical philosophy. Could a line in a clay tablet describing a divine assembly be read as literal, symbolic, or perhaps exaggerated? The answer, for many, depended less on the original Sumerian intent and more on the translator's preconceptions. Consider the work of Henry Rawlinson, Edward Hincks, and Jules Aupert, pioneers in the decipherment of Akkadian and Sumerian texts. Their translations were meticulous, yet their choices of words, gods, kings, divine decrees, often carried heavy interpretive weight. A phrase that may have originally meant great ones of the assembly became Anunnaki, a term framed in English to suggest supernatural beings with agency and will. In doing so, translators inadvertently amplified the sense of mystery surrounding these entities, laying the groundwork for both scholarly debate and modern speculation. Colonial translators were also influenced by the politics and priorities of their time. Archaeological expeditions were often tied to imperial ambition. Understanding the past was intertwined with demonstrating authority over the present. The Anunnaki, depicted as overseers of human labor, suddenly seemed to mirror contemporary hierarchies, reinforcing narratives of civilization guided or constrained by higher powers. Could this context have subtly altered the emphasis placed on certain passages? Did colonial perspectives, whether consciously or unconsciously, skew interpretations toward gods with power over humans rather than emphasizing metaphorical or symbolic meanings? Moreover, early translations were constrained by incomplete knowledge. Many tablets were fragmentary, damaged, or poorly preserved. Scholars faced gaps in grammar, vocabulary, and context. In these voids, conjecture often filled the space. For instance, texts describing gold, celestial journeys, or human creation were sometimes reconstructed in ways that suggested literal encounters with advanced beings. Where the original Sumerians may have described ritual, authority, or moral allegory, European translators occasionally rendered them as accounts of extraterrestrial intervention, a reading that would later influence modern Anunnaki theories. Religious and cultural biases further shaped interpretation. In predominantly Christian Europe, parallels with biblical stories were inevitable. Flood myths, angelic assemblies, and the creation of mankind were already familiar narratives. When colonial scholars encountered the Eridu Genesis or Atrahasis, they instinctively connected these with Noah or the Nephilim. By framing Sumerian myths in terms recognizable to a Western audience, the translations amplified the impression that the Anunnaki were analogous to biblical angels or divine visitors, bridging the gap between the ancient Near East and the imaginations of 19th century Europe. The consequences of these early interpretations extend far beyond academic journals. They seeded a narrative that persists today, influencing popular books, documentaries, and online forums. Zecharia Sitchin in the 20th century drew upon these translations, sometimes selectively, to construct a detailed account of Anunnaki visitors, gold mining, and genetic experimentation. While Sitchin's work remains controversial, it illustrates the enduring power of initial translation choices. Words inscribed in clay thousands of years ago, filtered through colonial scholarship, now shape global conversations about ancient mysteries. Yet, the original ambiguity of the tablets remains. Clay, broken and weathered, offers only fragments of meaning. Phrases can be read in multiple ways. Symbols carry layers of significance. Even today, as digital imaging and comparative linguistics improve our understanding, debates persist over whether the Anunnaki were literal beings, allegorical figures, or archetypes representing social and cosmic order. The influence of colonial translation, with its biases and limitations, is a reminder that each interpretation is just one layer atop a complex history of meaning. As we peer into these texts, it becomes clear that the story of the Anunnaki is inseparable from the story of those who first read them through European eyes. Their work gave us access to the ancient world, yet it also cast shadows that continue to shape our perception of history. Were the Anunnaki merely gods of myth, or could they be reflections of something far stranger? Did colonial translation distort the truth, or did it preserve secrets we have yet to fully grasp? And so, the mystery persists, woven into the clay of ancient tablets, the annotations of scholars, and the imagination of generations. Each reading, each interpretation, opens a window not only onto Sumerian civilization, but onto the enduring question of how knowledge passes through time, shaped by those who dare to uncover it. What truths remain hidden, obscured by language and perspective, waiting for a mind willing to see beyond the familiar. In the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, the towering ziggurats of and Nippur rose above sun-baked plains, their stepped terraces reaching skyward as if to bridge the mortal and the divine. These structures were not merely architectural feats. They were stages upon which power, belief, and ritual intertwined. Here, rulers performed ceremonies that proclaimed authority, while the myths of the Anunnaki, those enigmatic figures descending from the heavens, offered a backdrop that lent divine weight to human kingship. From the earliest dynasties, Sumerian texts describe kings receiving blessings, decrees, or even lifespans from gods. In the Sumerian king list, rulers are recorded with lifetimes that stretch for millennia, often associated with the favor of celestial beings. Some scholars argue that these numbers are symbolic, expressing the greatness or legitimacy of a king. Others speculate that the association with the Anunnaki, a pantheon with control over destiny, creation, and cosmic order, was consciously used to legitimize earthly authority. Could the very concept of rulership have been inseparable from the presence of these otherworldly patrons? Consider the way Sumerian inscriptions portray royal duties. Kings are described as intermediaries between humanity and the divine assembly, charged with maintaining order, ensuring agricultural abundance, and performing rituals that mirrored cosmic harmony. The Anunnaki, positioned as overseers and arbiters, reinforced this hierarchy. To the populace, the king was not merely a mortal ruler, he was the Anunnaki's chosen steward, acting on instructions that extended beyond the human realm. In this way, myth and politics intertwined, creating a system where religious narrative and statecraft reinforced each other. Visual representations played a role as well. Reliefs and cylinder seals depict kings in close proximity to horned, crowned figures, receiving symbols of power, or standing under the watchful gaze of celestial beings. Some show rulers presenting offerings to gods whose features echo descriptions of the Anunnaki. While these images can be interpreted as devotional art, they also carry the subtle message: kingship is sanctioned, even commanded, by forces beyond human comprehension. Was this an early form of political propaganda or a sincere reflection of belief? Perhaps it was both, a mechanism to consolidate authority and maintain social cohesion. Ritual practice itself amplified this connection. Royal ceremonies often included elaborate prayers, sacrifices, and processions designed to mirror the divine order. Temples functioned as centers not only of worship, but of governance, where the king's word carried the weight of cosmic mandate. Could these ceremonies, grounded in Anunnaki mythology, have subtly reinforced obedience among subjects, framing civic duties as fulfillment of divine will? The overlap between mythology and governance suggests that the stories of celestial beings were never abstract. They were deeply practical, woven into the mechanisms of power. Yet, the strategy was not purely manipulative. Myths of the Anunnaki may have offered rulers a framework for understanding human society within a larger cosmic context. By linking kingship to divine oversight, Sumerians expressed both reverence and order, portraying rulers as custodians of a universe shaped by the Anunnaki's decisions. This connection could have provided moral authority as well as political legitimacy, suggesting that kings were accountable not only to their people, but to a celestial assembly that demanded justice, ritual observance, and care for creation. The use of Anunnaki myths in legitimizing power was not unique to Sumer. Across cultures, rulers frequently invoked divine ancestry or patronage. Yet the Sumerian example is striking for its depth and detail. Kings are explicitly listed as chosen by the gods, their actions interwoven with mythic narratives. Did this practice influence later Mesopotamian dynasties in Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria, where rulers similarly framed their authority as divinely sanctioned? The continuity suggests that these myths were more than storytelling. They were instruments of political philosophy, shaping governance for centuries. Still, questions remain. To what extent did ordinary people perceive kings as genuine intermediaries of the Anunnaki, and to what extent did the association serve elite interests? How much of the myth was lived belief, and how much was codified rhetoric designed to preserve social order? Archaeology and textual analysis reveal fragments. Yet the full scope of perception, both popular and royal, eludes modern understanding. The ambiguity allows the mystery to endure, inviting reflection on the interplay between power, faith, and imagination. As we stand among the ruins of Sumer, imagining kings walking the terraces of ziggurats, receiving the favor of unseen beings, we confront the enduring enigma of authority itself. The myths of the Anunnaki, inscribed in clay, depicted on seals, and echoed in ritual, remain entangled with the very notion of kingship. Were these narratives carefully constructed instruments of rule, or were they sincere attempts to comprehend the divine? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between, a delicate balance of belief, symbolism, and strategy. In the quiet of ancient temples, the whispers of power persist. The Anunnaki may have departed, yet their stories continue to influence the way we interpret rulership, divine favor, and the human desire for cosmic connection. And so, the question lingers. Did the myths themselves confer legitimacy, or did they merely reflect a deeper human yearning to understand authority as something ordained beyond the earthly realm? As night falls over the flat plains of ancient Mesopotamia, the heavens unfold in a tapestry of stars, planets, and distant lights, their positions seemingly frozen in the silent rhythm of the cosmos. Amid these vast skies, the remnants of towering ziggurats and temple complexes stand in solemn testimony to a civilization that sought to connect the terrestrial with the celestial. These structures, often aligned with remarkable precision, have led scholars and enthusiasts alike to question: were these temples oriented with the stars in mind, specifically those linked to the enigmatic Anunnaki? Archaeological surveys of major sites, from Ur to Eridu, reveal patterns in temple layouts that correspond with certain celestial bodies. The orientation of stairways, the positioning of shrines, and the alignment of sanctuaries suggest more than functional design. They hint at deliberate astronomical considerations. Some researchers propose that these alignments reflect the path of Venus, Jupiter, or Saturn, planets that appear frequently in Mesopotamian astrology and myth. Could these celestial connections indicate that the Anunnaki, revered as overseers of cosmic and earthly order, were symbolically present in these architectural choices? Sumerian texts frequently tie deities to the movements of stars and planets. Nana, the moon god, and Inanna, associated with Venus, are central to many myths, often intersecting with narratives of the Anunnaki. Aligning a temple with a particular celestial body might have served multiple purposes: honoring the gods, embedding myth into daily life, and creating a tangible reflection of the cosmos on Earth. Was the alignment purely ritualistic, or did it also function as a form of communication, a celestial map connecting the human and divine realms? Some scholars point to the careful observation of solstices and equinoxes in temple construction. The rising sun over ziggurat terraces on specific days could illuminate shrines or statues, marking times of ceremonial significance. If coordinated with mythic narratives, these events would reinforce the perception that the Anunnaki's influence extended not only over earthly affairs, but across the heavens. The interplay of light, shadow, and architectural form might have been a daily reminder to the populace of the ever-present gaze of these powerful beings. Yet, questions remain. Were these alignments intentionally tied to the Anunnaki, or are modern interpretations imposing meaning where none was intended? Ancient Mesopotamians certainly revered the sky, but the precise correlation between temples and specific stars connected to the Anunnaki remains debated. Some researchers argue that Sumerian astronomical knowledge was advanced enough to guide temple orientation deliberately, while others caution that correlations may be coincidental, reflecting general celestial observation rather than devotion to specific deities. The mystery deepens when considering the symbolic significance of star patterns themselves. Certain constellations mentioned in cuneiform texts, such as the Great Twins or the Furrow, are associated with divine judgment, fertility, and cosmic order. If the Anunnaki were seen as arbiters of human destiny, their connection to these celestial markers could imply that temple orientation was both practical and metaphysical, a way to encode mythic authority into the very ground upon which cities rose. Did the temples serve as terrestrial anchors for heavenly power, or were they tools for priests to interpret the sky, divining the will of the Anunnaki? Artifacts and inscriptions offer tantalizing, though fragmentary, clues. Cylinder seals sometimes depict stars above divine figures, suggesting a cosmological awareness intertwined with religious narrative. Ritual texts describe offerings made at specific times, timed to celestial cycles aligning with festivals and agricultural seasons. In these practices, architecture, myth, and astronomy converge, creating a complex network in which the Anunnaki may have been perceived as orchestrators of both celestial and earthly rhythms. Yet, as we examine these ruins today, the sky itself has shifted. Precession, millennia of subtle celestial motion, alters the alignment of stars over thousands of years. The precise visual relationship between temple and star that ancient priests observed is no longer exact. Modern astronomers and archaeologists must reconstruct these alignments carefully, combining mathematics, mythology, and interpretation. Even then, certainty remains elusive. How much of the Anunnaki connection lies in genuine historical practice, and how much is conjecture drawn from humanity's desire to see order in the heavens? Perhaps the enduring intrigue lies precisely in this uncertainty. The temples, silent under the night sky, continue to inspire awe. Their deliberate geometry, orientation toward cosmic points, and connection to myths of beings who walked between heaven and earth invite reflection on human understanding. Were the Anunnaki truly observers of our ancestors, their presence encoded in stone and sky, or do these alignments reveal only humanity's perennial attempt to interpret the divine through architecture? As we trace the contours of ziggurats, imagine rituals performed atop terraces, and look upward to the constellations that watched over them, we confront a mystery spanning both time and space. The stars remain, distant yet familiar, while the intentions of those who built these sacred spaces remain partially hidden, leaving us to wonder, what did the builders know, and how much of the cosmos did they seek to bring within human reach? In these questions, the story continues, one that blends observation, belief, and ambition. The heavens and the earth, the mythic and the tangible, converge in the silent testimony of Mesopotamian temples. Somewhere in that convergence, the legacy of the Anunnaki may still linger, encoded in stone, shadow, and starlight. As the sun rises over the Fertile Crescent, casting long shadows across the ruins of ancient temples and city walls, one cannot help but feel the lingering presence of stories older than history itself. In these lands, where the Tigris and Euphrates carve their timeless paths, myths of divine beings, the Anunnaki, once shaped the lives of kings, priests, and ordinary citizens alike. Centuries later, echoes of these same narratives appear in religious texts far beyond Mesopotamia, raising a compelling question. Why do later religious traditions seem to borrow themes, motifs, and even archetypes from the world of the Anunnaki? Scholars have long noted striking parallels between Sumerian myths and stories found in later Hebrew, Babylonian, and Canaanite scriptures. The notion of powerful beings descending from the heavens, dispensing judgment or wisdom, is a recurring motif. Flood narratives, the concept of chosen humans and divine intermediaries all find early articulation in Mesopotamian texts such as the Atrahasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh. These same elements reappear, sometimes subtly, in later writings that emerged thousands of years after the original cuneiform tablets were inscribed. Could these repetitions reflect a continuity of human memory? Or were they deliberate adaptations of ancient myth to serve new theological and social frameworks? One theory suggests that scribes and scholars who traveled and traded throughout the Near East carried fragments of Anunnaki stories across regions and generations. Temples, libraries, and court records preserved these narratives, albeit in changing languages and scripts. In the Babylonian and Assyrian periods, priests meticulously recopied texts, sometimes integrating new cosmological interpretations while retaining the core mythic structure. As these texts circulated, they influenced neighboring cultures, eventually intersecting with the emerging monotheistic traditions of the Levant. Here we encounter the tantalizing possibility that Anunnaki motifs, divine judgment, celestial order, and the creation or shaping of humanity, were not lost but transformed. The parallels are not only thematic, but also symbolic. Consider the portrayal of divine beings governing human fate, a motif central to Anunnaki narratives. In later religious texts, angels, messengers, or intermediary figures occupy a similar role. Some scholars suggest that this reflects an evolution of mythic archetypes rather than literal borrowing. Yet the question persists: did these later texts consciously echo Mesopotamian sources, or do they reveal a deeper psychological or cultural memory that spans centuries and geographies? Flood myths offer one of the clearest examples. The tale of a great deluge sent to cleanse humanity while sparing a righteous survivor first appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis. Variations of this narrative resurface in later religious literature, carrying striking structural and thematic similarities. The idea of divine beings interacting with humans, dictating survival, and rewarding obedience resonates with the earlier stories of the Anunnaki, who were themselves depicted as both benefactors and regulators of human activity. Could these enduring motifs indicate that the Anunnaki stories served as foundational templates for moral and cosmological instruction in multiple cultures? It is also important to consider the socio-political context. Emerging religions often sought to legitimize authority, establish social order, or codify ethics. Incorporating themes from older, revered myths could confer a sense of antiquity and divine legitimacy. The Anunnaki, already enshrined in memory as powerful, celestial actors, provided a ready-made repository of motifs and symbols. By reinterpreting these elements within a new religious framework, leaders and scribes may have connected the past to the present, creating continuity that was both sacred and socially stabilizing. Yet, the process is neither straightforward nor universally agreed upon. Critics caution against reading direct lines of descent between Anunnaki myths and later texts. Variations in language, cultural priorities, and cosmological understanding complicate simple explanations. At the same time, the recurrence of similar motifs across regions suggests that something more than coincidence may be at work. Could it be that human imagination, combined with the memory of ancient stories, naturally reconstructs familiar patterns of divine intervention, judgment, and guidance? Or do these echoes reveal a conscious effort to preserve knowledge of beings whose presence was once taken for granted? Artifacts, temple inscriptions, and ritual texts hint at the breadth of Anunnaki influence. Inscriptions detailing creation, divine council meetings, and the appointment of rulers suggest that these myths permeated civic and religious life. Centuries later, when new faiths emerged, they too grappled with questions of human origin, divine authority, and the cosmos. Borrowing or transforming these ancient motifs may have been a way to anchor new religious concepts in the familiar framework of celestial oversight. Ultimately, the persistence of Anunnaki themes invites reflection on the nature of myth itself. Stories of powerful beings, judgment, creation, and celestial authority traverse time, adapting to new contexts while retaining traces of their origins. They reveal a cultural continuity that defies simple chronology and challenges our understanding of how knowledge, belief, and memory circulate through civilizations. As we trace these threads from Sumerian temples to the scrolls of later prophets, we confront a mystery that refuses to yield entirely to historical reconstruction. Why do certain motifs persist across millennia, bridging cultures and religions? How much of this continuity reflects deliberate adaptation? And how much is an echo of memory that has endured beyond the reach of written records? The answer remains elusive, suspended between history and speculation. And yet, in the quiet observation of texts, ruins, and celestial alignments, we glimpse the enduring shadow of the Anunnaki, their stories woven into the tapestry of human imagination, waiting for those who look closely enough to see the connections that time cannot erase. From the shadowed corners of libraries to the dimly lit rooms of clandestine gatherings, the stories of the Anunnaki continue to captivate the human imagination. Across the modern world, far removed from the mud-brick temples of Sumer and the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, these ancient myths have been adapted, reinterpreted, and woven into the beliefs of contemporary cults, spiritual movements, and esoteric circles. Here, the Anunnaki are no longer distant figures of Mesopotamian lore. They are active agents, symbols of hidden knowledge, and in some cases, guides for human destiny. One striking manifestation appears in New Age communities, where the Anunnaki are often portrayed as extraterrestrial beings who shaped humanity's evolution. Drawing loosely on the narratives preserved in Sumerian texts, adherents interpret them as advanced intelligences whose influence is embedded in human DNA, culture, and technology. Ancient cuneiform tablets are cited, sometimes accurately, sometimes selectively, as proof that our ancestors were participants in a grand experiment orchestrated by these celestial architects. In these interpretations, the Anunnaki are less myth and more blueprint, a template for understanding human potential and cosmic order. Beyond the New Age, fringe movements incorporate Anunnaki myths into elaborate cosmologies and ritual practices. Some claim secret wisdom handed down from antiquity, suggesting that understanding the Anunnaki grants access to knowledge deliberately obscured by mainstream institutions. Rituals, symbols, and meditative exercises are said to align participants with the energy or guidance of these ancient beings. Often, these practices blend Mesopotamian iconography with modern spiritual tools, from astrology to quantum metaphors, creating a hybrid belief system that resonates with seekers searching for cosmic significance. The appeal of these myths lies in their ambiguity. Unlike clearly defined religious dogmas, Anunnaki narratives are fragmentary, open-ended, and tantalizingly incomplete. Cuneiform tablets preserve glimpses of creation, divine hierarchy, and celestial activity, but they do not offer systematic explanations. For modern cults, this lack of closure is an opportunity. By filling gaps with speculation, ideology, or personal interpretation, these groups create a living mythology, one that feels both ancient and immediately relevant. Could the Anunnaki, then, be not merely relics of Mesopotamian imagination, but a canvas for contemporary spiritual exploration? Historical context plays a subtle yet important role. Movements emphasizing the Anunnaki often invoke scholarly authority, referencing archaeologists, translators, and even controversial authors like Zecharia Sitchin. By presenting these ideas as rooted in academic discovery, they blur the line between history and speculation, lending legitimacy to narratives that otherwise have little empirical foundation. It is a delicate interplay between evidence and interpretation, fact and myth, inviting followers to question not only the past, but the structures of knowledge and authority in the present. At the same time, psychological and social dimensions cannot be ignored. Belief in the Anunnaki offers more than a story. It provides identity, community, and a framework for understanding existence. Adherents may see themselves as custodians of hidden truths or participants in a cosmic drama that began millennia ago. In doing so, they echo the motivations ancient priests and scribes may have had to connect human lives with forces perceived as greater than themselves. Yet, in the modern context, these narratives are unmoored from temples or rulers, circulating freely and adapting to cultural and technological landscapes in ways Mesopotamian society could never have imagined. However, these modern appropriations raise questions. How much of what is presented as Anunnaki wisdom derives from primary sources, and how much emerges from imagination? Do these reinterpretations honor the original myths or transform them entirely? And crucially, what does it say about human fascination with the unknown that beings who may never have existed continue to inspire devotion, speculation, and ritual practice thousands of years after their stories were first recorded? Interestingly, the Anunnaki's enduring presence highlights a broader pattern. Myths rarely remain confined to time and place. Like rivers carving valleys, stories flow across cultures, re-emerging in unexpected forms. Just as earlier religious texts borrowed themes from Mesopotamia, modern movements appropriate, adapt, and reinvent the Anunnaki, bridging ancient civilizations with contemporary curiosity. The resonance is partly cultural, partly psychological, and partly mystical, reflecting our ongoing desire to locate meaning within the vast, unknowable cosmos. Yet for all their reinterpretations, the mysteries of the Anunnaki remain intact, whether invoked in ritual, debated in forums, or reimagined in literature and media. These beings retain their aura of ambiguity. They are at once historical, mythical, and symbolic, entities whose stories are incomplete, whose presence is felt rather than fully understood, and whose significance continues to evolve. As we observe these modern adaptations, we confront a compelling tension between ancient history and present belief, between recorded fact and imaginative reconstruction. What drives humans to seek connection with beings from a distant past, to inscribe contemporary meaning onto fragments of ancient myths? And in doing so, what might they reveal, not about the Anunnaki themselves, but about the persistent human quest to understand our origins, destiny, and the hidden forces that shape the world? The answers, as always, remain elusive, suspended in the interplay of myth, history, and imagination, inviting anyone who listens closely to ponder the enduring shadow of the Anunnaki, stretching from the ruins of Sumer to the hidden enclaves of modern seekers, waiting quietly for discovery. From the quiet, dust-laden shelves of museum archives to the sun-baked ruins of Ur and Nippur, the figure of the Anunnaki has ignited debates that are as old as their stories themselves. Scholars meticulously decipher cuneiform tablets, cross-referencing king lists, hymns, and mythic narratives, striving to reconstruct the religious and cultural landscape of ancient Mesopotamia. Across this rigorous scholarly terrain, the Anunnaki are understood primarily as deities within a complex pantheon, their roles encoded in ritual, governance, and cosmology. Yet, beyond these established interpretations, a very different discourse unfolds, one in which fringe theorists and alternative historians posit extraordinary claims that challenge the foundations of conventional archaeology. The clash begins with methodology. Archaeologists rely on evidence, artifacts, inscriptions, stratigraphy, and peer-reviewed analysis. They study the Anunnaki in the context of Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian civilizations, emphasizing historical continuity, cultural symbolism, and religious practice. For them, the Anunnaki are powerful mythic figures, embodiments of natural forces, societal structures, and moral codes. Any assertion that these beings were extraterrestrials or architects of human evolution is treated skeptically, often dismissed as imaginative speculation lacking empirical grounding. Fringe theorists, in contrast, approach the same evidence with a markedly different lens. Cuneiform tablets, especially those describing creation, celestial events, or human origins, are interpreted literally rather than symbolically. Anomalies in archaeological sites, gigantic stone structures, unexplained inscriptions, or astronomical alignments are presented as hints of lost knowledge, or even as proof of advanced beings interacting with early humans. In this perspective, the Anunnaki are not confined to myth. They are agents whose presence shaped history in tangible, measurable ways. This interpretive divergence forms the crux of the ongoing tension. One side reads the past through the meticulous frameworks of academic rigor, the other through the speculative, sometimes conspiratorial, lens of alternative inquiry. The controversy deepens when considering translation and interpretation. Ancient Sumerian is a language still imperfectly understood. Words carry multiple meanings, grammar shifts over centuries, and gaps in the record leave room for ambiguity. Archaeologists caution against overextension, emphasizing the need to contextualize tablets within a broader corpus of texts and historical realities. Fringe theorists, however, often highlight these very ambiguities, suggesting that what mainstream scholars consider gaps or uncertainties are in fact hidden truths waiting to be uncovered. A single mistranslated or contested word, whether describing gods descending from the sky or gold extraction, can ignite entire debates about the nature of the Anunnaki, their purpose, and their relationship with humanity. Public fascination further fuels this clash. Media, books, and documentaries often amplify sensational interpretations, framing the Anunnaki as mysterious overlords, extraterrestrial engineers, or secret manipulators of human destiny. Archaeologists may respond with caution, emphasizing that captivating stories should not overshadow the careful accumulation of evidence. Yet the allure of the unknown is persistent. For many, the possibility that ancient myths conceal forgotten knowledge, or that human history is intertwined with forces beyond our understanding, is irresistible. The tension between rigor and imagination becomes a mirror of society's broader curiosity about the unknown, reflecting our desire to explore both fact and possibility. There is also a temporal dimension to consider. Archaeologists see the Anunnaki as products of a specific cultural and historical context, their significance bound to the early city-states of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon, dating back as far as 3100 BC. Fringe theorists, however, extend the narrative, connecting the Anunnaki to later myths, global flood legends, astronomical phenomena, and even modern conspiracy theories. By tracing threads across continents and millennia, these interpretations suggest a continuity of influence that mainstream scholarship finds unsubstantiated. The resulting dialogue is not merely academic. It touches on epistemology itself, raising questions about how knowledge is validated, transmitted, and contested. Despite these differences, both camps engage with the same essential mystery, the enduring enigma of the Anunnaki. Archaeologists probe the past to understand the social, religious, and technological achievements of ancient peoples. And fringe theorists seek to uncover hidden narratives that conventional methods might overlook. Both approaches reveal a shared human fascination with beings who, whether historical or mythic, occupy a liminal space between reality and imagination. Ultimately, the debate over the Anunnaki exemplifies the complex interplay between evidence, interpretation, and imagination. It is a conversation that spans disciplines, cultures, and generations, highlighting the persistent tension between the desire for certainty and the allure of mystery. Perhaps the reason the Anunnaki continue to inspire both rigorous study and speculative exploration is precisely because their story resists definitive resolution. Are they mythic constructs, divine intermediaries, extraterrestrial architects, or something else entirely? As we sift through ancient tablets, study crumbling ziggurats, and ponder the fragments of Mesopotamian lore, the question remains open. The Anunnaki challenge us to consider how knowledge is shaped, who decides what counts as evidence, and whether some mysteries are meant to endure, inviting each of us to wonder, cautiously yet curiously, what secrets the past still holds in its silent ruins. Beneath the blistering sun of southern Mesopotamia, among the ruins of Ur, Eridu, and Nippur, one can almost hear whispers of voices long vanished. Clay tablets, etched with the careful strokes of scribes over 5 millennia ago, recount tales of gods, kings, and the enigmatic Anunnaki. These figures, at once awe-inspiring and inscrutable, occupy a realm where myth and history intertwine. Yet, a question persists. If the Anunnaki are indeed mythical constructs, why did the people of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon invent them in the first place? The first answer may lie in the human need to explain. Ancient civilizations observed the world with keen awareness but limited scientific understanding. Rivers flooded unpredictably, seasons shifted, and celestial movements dazzled the eye yet defied easy explanation. By personifying natural forces as deities, early societies created a framework for understanding the chaos around them. The Anunnaki, in this context, were not mere characters in fanciful stories. They were embodiments of cosmic order and social structure, agents through whom the mysteries of the universe could be interpreted. These myths also served societal purposes. The Anunnaki were depicted as arbiters of justice, enforcers of divine law, and intermediaries between humanity and the ultimate powers of the cosmos. Kings and rulers invoked them to legitimize authority, ensuring that governance was not merely human but sanctioned by forces beyond comprehension. Temples, ziggurats, and ritual precincts were erected as tangible bridges between the mortal and the divine. Spaces where the presence of these beings could be invoked, acknowledged, and appeased. Could the Anunnaki, then, be understood as instruments of cohesion, designed to unify communities under a shared cosmic narrative? Yet the question deepens when we consider the richness and specificity of these myths. Unlike generic deities of vague power, the Anunnaki were detailed, hierarchical, and assigned particular roles and domains. Some controlled aspects of fertility, agriculture, or the waters. Others oversaw justice, the underworld, or celestial phenomena. Their stories contain narratives of rivalry, collaboration, and intervention, reflecting an intricate understanding of human society projected onto divine figures. Could this complexity suggest that these myths were not merely functional, but also reflective of a sophisticated cultural imagination, where human anxieties, ambitions, and ethics were encoded into the actions of immortal beings? Speculative voices argue further, suggesting that the invention of the Anunnaki may have roots in experiences or knowledge now lost to time. Could these myths preserve memories of extraordinary events, celestial phenomena, or technological achievements that were later mythologized? Some fringe theories posit that unusual alignments, unexplained structures, or anomalous artifacts hint at knowledge that ancient peoples could not fully comprehend, leading them to personify these forces as gods. While mainstream archaeology emphasizes caution, noting that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, the resonance of these theories underscores a persistent human desire to connect the known with the unknown, to map meaning onto the mysteries that surround us. The act of invention itself warrants reflection. Myths are, in many ways, a mirror, reflecting the hopes, fears, and values of their creators. The Anunnaki may embody the human grappling with mortality, power, and the impermanence of life, offering narratives through which communities could process the unthinkable: famine, flood, disease, or the abrupt rise and fall of city-states. In doing so, they provided a scaffold for memory, history, and ethical reflection. Could the Anunnaki, then, be as much about humanity as they are about divinity? Symbolic constructs revealing what it meant to be alive in a world both beautiful and brutal. Cross-cultural echoes add another layer of intrigue. Flood narratives, celestial beings, and divine intermediaries appear in myths from Egypt, India, and Mesoamerica, raising the question, are the Anunnaki purely Mesopotamian inventions, or do they tap into a shared human impulse to externalize the unknown? Perhaps the invention of such beings is universal, a testament to humanity's drive to render invisible forces tangible, to narrativize the incomprehensible, and to seek guidance from figures who transcend mortality. Even within the tablets themselves, ambiguity remains. Variations in translation, missing fragments, and shifting interpretations mean that what we think we understand about the Anunnaki is partial, provisional, and sometimes contradictory. Were they benevolent, malevolent, or beyond such human judgments? Did they exist to teach, punish, or observe? Or, as some suggest, were they entirely symbolic, a sophisticated allegory for natural forces and social order, given life through the imagination of those who first carved their names into clay? In the end, the invention of the Anunnaki may be inseparable from the human impulse to seek meaning, whether as gods, allegories, or reflections of lost knowledge. They continue to captivate, inviting each generation to ponder not only the mysteries of the ancient world, but also the mysteries of the mind that conceived them. Why, across thousands of years and miles of shifting civilization, did these beings endure in story, art, and ritual? The answer remains elusive, hovering in the space between human imagination and the enigmatic forces that shaped early life on Earth, a question that beckons us to wonder what ancient minds saw, feared, and revered in the skies above Mesopotamia.